My name is Emily. In my late 30s, I juggle a full-time office job with helping out at my family's liquor store. During weekdays, I work in the office until 6 p.m., then spend my evenings managing the accounts and operations at the store. Our liquor store was once a thriving business, supplying alcoholic beverages to hotel banquet halls, pubs, sushi restaurants, and more. We enjoyed a near monopoly in the neighborhood as there were no other liquor stores around. However, recent years have brought significant changes. New regulations limiting the hours alcohol can be served have drastically reduced consumption. Banquets have become rare and pubs have even stopped serving alcohol in the evenings. These changes have led to serious financial difficulties for our family business. As the eldest daughter, with my sister Noah already married, the responsibility of our struggling family liquor store fell on my shoulders. My parents were terrible at managing finances, and their outdated business practices only made things worse as the store's fortunes declined. The existing debt ballooned without us realizing, bringing us to the brink of bankruptcy. Determined not to close the store, my father refused to give up, so I decided to move back home 2 years ago to help. However, the income from the liquor store alone wasn't enough to cover our debts, so I continued my day job and assisted at the store in the evenings. Every weekday evening, after my office job, I'd return home to find my father in the store, the shutters open, holding his favorite beer. "Ah, finally you're back," he'd say, greeting me with a hopeful smile. "Dad, are you drinking again?" "These bottles aren't selling. I'm just drinking them." My father, having consumed quite a bit of alcohol, reeked of it, and his speech was slurred. "Dad, that's enough. Don't drink the merchandise." He responded loudly, "Don't lecture me, the daughter who can't even get married." With that, he stumbled into the house. I cleaned the cluttered store and dived into the books for the day. Dinner didn't happen until after 9 p.m. when I finished the store's closing tasks. I'm used to it, but I still get hungry. Since my parents had already gone to bed, I headed to the kitchen to make instant ramen and started preparing breakfast for the next morning. My mom prefers bread for breakfast and my dad likes rice, so every day I prepare both a Western and Japanese meal. This is how my day ends. On the weekends, when I finally have a day off, I set my alarm for 10 a.m., hoping to sleep in. However, my mother wakes me up at 8 a.m. "Hey, heat up your father's miso soup quickly." "Why?" "You can do that, Mom." I refuse. "Why should I have to do the housework when you're here?" "Now get up." My mother seems to mistake me for a housemaid. True, I've always been meticulous and enjoyed cooking and cleaning, so I naturally took on the housework. But ever since high school, my mother, who came to rely heavily on me, dumped everything from taking care of my sister to housework on me. Fed up with this situation, I got a job and started the work I do now as soon as I graduated. In my teens, work was incredibly tough, and there were many times I wanted to give up. But each time, my seniors at work supported me, helping me to keep going. Unable to enjoy a leisurely morning, I would wake up, finish the housework, and go straight to work at the liquor store. I began shouldering the family debt when the business started to struggle, a total of $3 million a year. Frankly, it's not an easy sum to manage. I lived frugally to repay the debt, using only $1 cosmetics from the dollar store and packing homemade lunches. I endured the cold as long as I could to save on heating bills. In a bid to pull us out of this situation, I took it upon myself to help rebuild our family business. I believed that just supplying alcohol to local businesses wasn't going to cut it. I suggested to my dad that we leverage the internet, but he was resistant, saying, "Our old way is the best way." "I'm not the problem, the world is." While I was deep in thought about the business, my mom would nudge me with household chores. "Is lunch ready yet? Did you hang the laundry?" Juggling these tasks left me with little time to devise and execute a plan to revitalize the business, always keeping me a step behind. After considerable effort, I successfully launched online sales using the internet, focusing on rare alcoholic beverages available at our store. With restrictions limiting people's movement, this treasure hunt-like approach to online sales became popular, and our business began to thrive. Simultaneously, our store's online presence attracted more foot traffic. My already limited free time dwindled further, leaving me with hardly any time to myself. I kept pushing forward, driven by the goal of alleviating my parents' debt. Finally, things were turning around, and my parents were becoming more financially stable. Around that time, I received the news. Noah's expecting a baby. "Congratulations. That's wonderful. a grandchild. I beamed with joy, but my mother's expression turned cold. That's why you need to leave this house. What? I couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Confused, I looked at my mom, and my dad, who had been eavesdropping with a drink in hand, chimed in. Noah and his wife will be moving in here. Pack your things and go. But I came back to take care of both of you. My pleas fell on deaf ears. My sister had always been carefree, rarely lifting a finger around the house. Despite her initial ambition to become a preschool teacher, she dropped out of college after just a few months, claiming boredom. Even after marrying, she continued to rely on our parents' financial support. Her husband's sporadic employment meant they lived off our parents' money and occasional part-time earnings, yet they seemed to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, taking trips here and there. I had my suspicions but chose to ignore them. Suddenly being told to leave the house left me scrambling to find a new place. Busy as I was, I pleaded with my parents for at least 2 months' grace period. I put the liquor store work on hold and began the search for a new home. One day, my dad called my workplace. Emily, what the hell are you doing? The store is too busy. Come home right now. No, I'm at work. Ask Noah, I replied, exasperated by his attempt to dump more responsibilities on me after telling me to leave home. Frustrated, I hung up the phone. A few minutes later, my boss approached me. Emily, your father's on the phone again. Again, I apologized for the inconvenience, I said, picking up the phone. My father started repeating his earlier demands, his voice growing louder with each word. Emily, you can leave early today if you need to, my boss offered, sensing the situation's urgency. Despite having work to finish, I didn't want my father's incessant calls to disturb the office any longer, so I decided to leave early that day. Arriving at our family liquor store, I found my father drinking, even though we were still open for business. Drinking again instead of working, I exclaimed, my frustration evident. He shrugged off my accusation. Understanding the tastes of our products requires sampling, he insisted. You focus on your tasks. Realizing I wouldn't get through to him in his current state, I quietly began attending to the family business duties. From that point on, I juggled my job, household tasks, house hunting, and the responsibilities of running the liquor store, living an unimaginably hectic life. Then, one day, the stress became too much. I collapsed at work and woke up in a hospital bed. Jason, my colleague who had come with me, explained that I had fainted, hitting my head on the corner of my desk. As I gently touched the bandages wrapped around my head, I felt relieved. That was frightening. How are you feeling now? Better, I replied quietly. Tears welled up in my eyes at his kindness. Kindness had been a rare sight in my life over the past few years. At home, despite my efforts at the liquor store and with household chores, appreciation was scarce. Being constantly manipulated by my alcoholic father and self-centered mother had pushed me to my limits. Seeing me in this vulnerable state, Jason said, "You've worked incredibly hard. Soon, you won't have to worry about the house anymore. Let's take it easy from now on." Grateful for Jason's empathy, I nodded. Moving out was on the horizon. The thought of it gave me renewed strength to endure it a little longer. Finally, I found a house and began preparing to move out. Despite this, my parents incessantly nagged me to clean every nook and cranny of the house for my younger sister and her husband, who were moving in. Fed up with being the obedient daughter, I finally stood my ground. "Why don't you handle it yourselves? It's not my responsibility anymore." My retort seemed to catch my parents off guard. My father responded sharply, "What's with the attitude? We'll be glad to be rid of someone like you." I have reached my limit with my unappreciative parents who never acknowledged my efforts. After I completed my move, my sister and her husband settled into our parents' house, and I finally felt liberated from their grip. During the weekdays, I focused on work, typically home before 8 p.m. Weekends became a cherished time for sleeping in, leisurely walks, shopping, and reclaiming precious moments for myself. Each day was a newfound joy. Then, 1 month later, a phone call left me bursting into laughter. "What's going on with this month's debt payment?" It was my mother suddenly calling in anger. "Wait, a debt? Wasn't that created by you guys?" Despite all the effort I put into rebuilding the liquor store business and handling all the house chores, who was it that kicked me out for their convenience? I didn't give my mom a chance to respond. And in the background, Noah chimed in. "Please help us out. I had no idea about the debt. I thought the liquor store was thriving and I could have an easy life coming back home." His pleas continued, but life wasn't going to be that simple. All I could do was laugh at the self-centeredness of my family, now including my sister and her husband. 4 adults should be able to manage their finances, right? When I mentioned this, I could hear my mom and Noah arguing loudly on the other end of the phone. They hurled insults, blaming each other for their inaction, completely forgetting I was still on the line. The argument escalated for several minutes. As I listened, disappointment in my family deepened, strengthening my resolve to distance myself from them. My dad, constantly drinking and avoiding work. My mom, unwilling to handle household chores. Noah, preferring not to work and relying on her parents. And Noah's husband, equally uninterested in employment. With such an attitude among 4 adults, the income from the liquor store couldn't possibly cover the nearly $1,000 in monthly debt payments and living expenses. Fed up, I declared, I don't want to be involved anymore. By the way, I'm getting married soon and plan to move overseas in a few months. Don't rely on me anymore. Upon hearing this, my mom reacted hastily. Overseas? You must have a lot of money. Don't go overseas. Come back home. I reached my breaking point and hung up on her. They kept calling, but I refused to answer any more calls from my family. The next day, I changed my cell phone number and asked my workplace to block any calls intended for me. Being in America allowed me to create distance from my family, and with the support of those around me, I began to rebuild my life. Several months later, just before leaving America, I received word from a relative that the online liquor store business I had built was in trouble. Mismanagement had led to delayed shipments, incorrect orders, and a flood of customer complaints. Negative word of mouth spread quickly, tarnishing the store's reputation and impacting sales. Concurrently, my father's daily drinking habits became a local talking point, casting a shadow over the store's image and reducing customer traffic. Sales plummeted, and the store, which had been on the path to financial stability, was forced to shut down. The 4 individuals, now lacking credibility, struggled to find employment locally. Unable to repay their debts, they lost the store and the house they had used as collateral, leaving them without means of income or a place to stay. After losing their home, the family of 4 desperately tried to reach out to me. Fortunately, my extended family, who had become my allies, protected my whereabouts, allowing me to avoid contact with them. Despite Noah's wife being pregnant and nearing her due date, all 4 adults remained unemployed. Their daily quarrels, discussions on survival strategies, and reluctance to seek employment eventually devolved into petty arguments and blame games. Meanwhile, I married Jason, my coworker who had stood by me during my hospitalization. Our bond grew stronger through that experience. Around the same time, we were both offered positions at our company's overseas branch. These circumstances led to our relationship and our decision to marry. After dedicating so much time to rebuilding my parents' business, I now cherish the moments with my husband and strive to balance our work and home life together. For years, my family took my sacrifices for granted. They neglected to put in any effort, relying on others for everything, with only their own benefit in mind. It was predictable what would happen to people who never bothered to try. I am grateful to those who rescued me. Using my family as a negative example, I strive to live a fulfilling life, considering not only my own interests but also those of others.
The aroma of roasted turkey and lingering judgment filled my parents' dining room. Through the large bay windows, snow was beginning to fall on their perfectly manicured lawn in Greenwich, Connecticut, a stark contrast to my grandfather's worthless land in West Texas that had become the latest source of family tension. I'm Catherine Morgan, though my family insists on calling me Kate, their way of diminishing everything about me, right down to my name. At 31, I'm the youngest of 3 children and the only one who saw value in the 500 acres of seemingly barren desert land my grandfather left me in his will 6 months ago. Kate, my brother Thomas said, cutting into his organic free-range turkey, be reasonable. That land hasn't produced anything but tumbleweeds for 3 generations. His wife Victoria nodded in agreement, her designer bracelet catching the light from the crystal chandelier above. My sister Elizabeth chimed in from across the table. Even Grandpa called it his biggest mistake. You're just being stubborn. I took a small sip of water, letting their words wash over me like they had for the past 6 months. They had no idea about the geological surveys I'd commissioned or the quiet meetings I'd been having with Titan Energy's exploration team. Sometimes the best strategy is simply waiting for the right moment. The property taxes alone are draining your savings, my father, William Morgan, added. He'd been a successful investment banker before retiring and never missed an opportunity to remind us about financial responsibility. A quick sale would at least give you something to invest properly. My mother dabbed her lips with a linen napkin. Darling, we're just worried about you. First you leave your position at Goldman Sachs to find yourself. And now, you're clinging to this worthless piece of desert. I had to bite back a smile. My time finding myself had actually been spent studying geological surveys, oil extraction technologies, and mineral rights law. The small apartment I'd moved into wasn't because I couldn't afford better. It was because every spare dollar went into research and preparation. We have a buyer lined up, Thomas continued, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. One of my real estate investment group clients. They'll take it off your hands for $175,000. That's generous considering the location. Generous. If they only knew about the preliminary soil samples, or the mineral rights analysis, or the fact that I'd already turned down 3 quiet offers from smaller energy companies. But Titan Energy's chief geologist had confirmed what I'd suspected. The land sat on what could be one of the largest untapped oil reserves in West Texas. The papers are ready. Thomas slid the folder across the table. Just sign, and you can put this whole thing behind you. You know, Thomas, I said carefully, it's interesting that you're so concerned about my financial well-being now. Where was this concern when you tried to contest Grandpa's will? The room went silent. My brother's face flushed. 6 months ago, he'd hired a team of lawyers trying to prove Grandpa wasn't of sound mind when he left me the land instead of splitting it between all 3 grandchildren. That's ancient history, Elizabeth cut in quickly. We're talking about your future, Kate. My future. I stood up slowly, straightening my simple black dress. Bought off the rack at a department store, much to my mother's horror. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. Just then my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, my contact at Titan Energy. Board approved the offer. Paperwork coming tomorrow morning. Congratulations. I smiled, gathering my things. I should go. Early meeting tomorrow. Kate, my father's voice carried that familiar note of disapproval. Don't walk away from this opportunity. That land has been nothing but a burden on this family for 3 generations. Actually, I paused at the door. Grandpa told me something interesting before he died. He said sometimes the best investments are the ones nobody else sees value in. Kind of like that little tech startup you advised him not to invest in back in '98. What was it called again? Oh, right, Amazon. I left them sitting there, surrounded by their certainty and judgment. Tomorrow morning, Titan Energy's offer would hit the news, and their world would shift on its axis. Sometimes the sweetest victory is the one you never saw coming. As I drove home through the snowy streets, I thought about my grandfather's last words to me. Catherine, he'd said, his voice weak, but his eyes sharp as ever, that land isn't just dirt and rocks. It's a test. A test to see who in this family has the patience to look deeper, to think longer, to stand firm when everyone else says sell. I pulled into my parking spot at my modest apartment building, the same building my family thought I lived in because I couldn't afford better. They had no idea I owned the entire complex through a holding company, one of several quiet investments I'd made while they thought I was floundering. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. Press release scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Board wants to meet you in person next week. I smiled, thinking about tomorrow's family breakfast. Another Morgan family tradition where they try once more to convince me to sign away my inheritance. Little did they know, in less than 24 hours, that worthless desert land would be worth more than everything else the family owned combined. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's letting them discover just how wrong they were all by themselves. The next morning dawned crisp and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow as I parked my Civic outside my parents' Tudor-style mansion. Another family breakfast, another chance for them to question my judgment. Only today would be different. 8:47 a.m. 13 minutes until Titan Energy's press release. My mother opened the door before I could knock, perfect as always in her channel suit. "Kate, darling, you're late." I checked my watch. Actually 3 minutes early, but being late was their way of maintaining control. The breakfast room smelled of coffee and condescension. Thomas and Victoria were already seated, his laptop open beside his plate. Elizabeth was typing furiously on her phone, probably updating her Instagram about another charity gala. "I took the liberty of having the papers drafted properly," Thomas said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "All you need to do is sign." I poured myself a coffee, noting the time. 8:52 a.m. "Kate," my father began, using his boardroom voice, "you need to think about your future. That land has been draining resources from this family since your grandfather bought it in 75. "Actually," I said, taking a small sip of coffee, "I've been thinking a lot about the future. About legacy, investment, patience." "Patience doesn't pay property taxes," Elizabeth snorted. 8:56 a.m. Speaking of payments, Thomas continued, "My client is willing to handle all the transfer fees. You'll walk away with a clean $175,000. Victoria chimed in, "That's enough for a down payment on a proper apartment, at least." 8:58 a.m. "You know what Grandpa told me about that land?" I set down my coffee cup carefully. "He said sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as mistakes." "Your grandfather was a dreamer," my father said dismissively. "That's why he died with only that worthless plot to his name." 9:00 a.m. Right on cue, Thomas's laptop pinged with a news alert. His face went from smug to confused to pale in the span of 3 seconds. This must be a mistake," he stammered. "What is it?" my mother demanded. Thomas turned the laptop around, his hands shaking slightly. The headline blazed across the screen. "Titan Energy, ANNOUNCES, $50 million, APUISITON of PRINTEXAS oil field. Largest untapped reserve discovered in last decade." Elizabeth's phone clattered to the floor. Victoria's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "The Morgan family plot," Thomas read aloud, his voice cracking, "estimated to contain over 300 million barrels of recoverable oil. Preliminary agreements signed with current owner Catherine Morgan. $50 million, my father whispered. "Cash offer," I confirmed. "Plus 5% of gross production royalties for the next 30 years. Estimated value of the total package." I paused, enjoying the moment. Just over $2 billion. The silence that followed was absolute. But you said you were struggling," my mother finally managed. "No," I corrected gently. "You said I was struggling. I said I was being patient." My phone buzzed. Marcus again. "Board wants to move up the meeting." Private jet standing by at Teterboro. You knew, Thomas accused, his face reddening. You knew all along there was oil. I suspected. Then I researched. Then I confirmed. Then I negotiated. I stood up, smoothing my department store dress. You know, Thomas, it's interesting. If your legal challenge to Grandpa's will had succeeded, you'd be worth about $700 million right now. Elizabeth made a choking sound. The meeting, my father started, shifting instantly into business mode. You'll need representation. I can call Harrison at J.P. Morgan. Actually, I cut him off. I've been working with Goldman's energy team for the past 4 months. You remember Goldman Sachs? Where I was wasting my potential before I left. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Catherine, darling, we should discuss this as a family. We are discussing it, I replied. I'm informing you that the deal is done. The papers are signed. And that worthless land you've been mocking for 6 months. It just made me one of the richest women in Texas. I gathered my things, pausing at the door. Oh, and Thomas, you can keep your $175,000 offer. I'll be busy setting up a proper energy investment portfolio. As I walked to my car, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Elizabeth was crying. Thomas was shouting about legal reviews. My mother was calling someone about an emergency family meeting. But I had a plane to catch and an empire to build. Sometimes the best success isn't just proving people wrong. It's showing them exactly how right you've been all along. My phone buzzed one more time. A message from an unknown number. Your grandfather would be proud. Martha. Martha. Grandpa's old secretary. The one who'd slipped me the initial geological surveys 6 months ago. The one person who'd known what that land really meant. I smiled, starting my car. The day was just beginning. And I had a board meeting to prepare for. After all, $2 billion is just the starting point when you know exactly what you're doing. 3 months after Titan Energy's announcement shook my family's world, I sat in my new office on the 47th floor of a downtown Manhattan skyscraper. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city where I was quietly building something far bigger than just an oil fortune. My phone buzzed. Another message from Thomas. The 5th this week. Katie, we need to discuss the family investment opportunity. Dad's put together a comprehensive proposal. I added it to the growing folder of desperate attempts at reconciliation and control. The past 3 months had been a masterclass in watching people scramble to rewrite history. My assistant Julia appeared in the doorway. Your mother's in the lobby again. 3rd time this week. The usual response. Ms. Morgan is in meetings. Would you like to schedule an appointment through proper channels? Julia smiled. She left another envelope with the receptionist. I knew what it contained without opening it. Another invitation to a family dinner, probably at Le Bernardin or Daniel. Somewhere suitably expensive to show they now saw me as an equal. As if money was what made someone worthy of respect. Also, Julia continued, the Goldman Sachs team is ready for you. They're excited about the new energy fund. I smiled, remembering how my father had tried to get his old contacts at Goldman to help him advise me. What he didn't know was that I'd already been working with their top energy investment team to launch a $5 billion clean energy transition fund. Send them in. As I stood to greet the Goldman team, I caught my reflection in the window. No more department store clothes. Today, I wore a perfectly tailored Armani suit, not to impress anyone, but because I chose it. Success hadn't changed me. It had just given me the freedom to be exactly who I was. The meeting went brilliantly. By the time they left, We had the framework for what would become the largest private clean energy investment fund in North America. My grandfather's worthless land wasn't just making me rich, it was helping me reshape the entire energy sector. Later that afternoon, Elizabeth showed up unannounced. Security called. Julia informed me. She's insisting it's a family emergency. Let her up, I said after a moment. But stay close. Elizabeth burst in, designer handbag clutched like a shield. Katie, you have to help. James is in trouble. James? Her husband who'd laughed the loudest at Thanksgiving about my desert dirt. The hedge fund is collapsing, she continued. We need a capital injection. Just 10 million. You won't even notice it's gone. I studied my sister carefully. Did Dad send you? She flushed. He thought he might be more receptive to family. Family, I repeated softly. Like when you and Thomas tried to have Grandpa declared mentally incompetent after the will reading? That was Thomas's idea. I just went along with it, like you always do. I stood up, walking to the window. Tell me something, Elizabeth. Did you ever ask yourself why Grandpa left me that land? She was quiet for a moment. Because you were his favorite? No, because I was the only one who ever asked him about it. The only one who sat with him for hours while he talked about geology and mineral rights and patient investment. Everyone else was too busy waiting for him to die so they could sell it. Katie, please. It's Catherine, I corrected. And I'm not giving James money to bail out his bad investments. But I will give you some advice. The same advice Grandpa gave me. Look deeper. Think longer. Stand firmer. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'll have my team review James's fund. If there's something worth salvaging, we'll discuss terms. Real terms, not family favors. After she left, Julia brought in the latest financial reports. Titan's production numbers are exceeding projections. The royalty payments alone this quarter will be. Double them and send them to Martha, I interrupted. Anonymous donation to her grandchildren's college fund. Julia smiled. Already done. My phone buzzed again. A message from Thomas's wife, Victoria. We need to talk privately. About Thomas's gambling debts. I added it to the folder. The family secrets were tumbling out now. One desperate plea at a time. That evening, as I was preparing to leave, my father made one last attempt. A text message. The family name means something in this city. We should be working together, not apart. I looked out at the darkening skyline, at the city where I was building my own legacy. You're right, I typed back. The Morgan name does mean something. That's why I'm launching my projects under my full name, Catherine Elizabeth Morgan, so everyone knows exactly which Morgan is changing the energy industry. I gathered my things, heading for the private elevator. Tomorrow I had meetings with solar technology developers, wind farm operators, and 3 major investment banks. The oil money from that worthless land was just the beginning. My phone buzzed one final time. A photo from Martha, my grandfather's old desk nameplate, the one that had sat in his study for 40 years. Found this in storage, her message read. He always said it would look better on your desk. I smiled, thinking about that old wooden desk plate with its simple inscription. Look deeper. And I had. Past the family doubts, past the surface assumptions, past the easy answers. $2 billion hadn't just bought me freedom from their expectations. It had bought me the power to build something they never imagined possible. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in proving people wrong. It's in proving yourself right in ways they never saw coming. 3 years later, the Catherine Morgan Clean Energy Fund would be worth $50 billion, making my original oil fortune look like pocket change. The worthless land that my family had mocked had become the foundation of an empire that would help transition the world away from fossil fuels altogether. And that, as my grandfather would say, was worth more than all the oil in Texas. Because sometimes the best investment isn't in what people can see. It's in what they're too blind to notice. And sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what you inherit, but what you build from it. I never thought my life would feel like a cheap soap opera until Thanksgiving. It all started with the clinking of glasses and the smell of roasted turkey drifting through the living room. The table was covered in an earthy brown cloth filled with traditional dishes. Our entire extended family had gathered at my parents' house in Portland. Aunt Carol brought her pumpkin pie. My cousin Luke was loudly cracking jokes at the head of the table. And me, I just sat quietly like I did every year. No one asked if I needed help. No one asked how work was going. They never really cared. I was cutting up mashed potatoes for my niece Ellie when a too familiar voice rang out sharp enough to freeze the room. Before we carve the turkey, I have something to say. My sister Vanessa stood up, flashing a smile that was sickeningly sweet. Her hair was meticulously curled, her nails painted blood red, her tone crisp and rehearsed like she practiced it in front of a mirror for hours. Everyone looked up, forks suspended in midair. I held my breath. "I think it's time we were all honest with each other," she said, glancing around the room like a pageant queen about to announce a winner. "Last week, we took a vote." My father cleared his throat. My mother set her wine glass down, visibly eager. "And the result," Vanessa paused, inhaling dramatically before turning to me. "Isla, we've decided. You are no longer part of this family." The room went still. I thought I misheard. But then the worst thing happened. The table applauded. Applause. Real applause. And Carol whistled softly. Luke raised his glass like he was toasting. And my mother? She burst out laughing like it was the funniest joke of the night. Finally, someone said it. She commented casually, like noting the weather. I looked at my father. He didn't turn to me, just shook his head slightly and murmured, "Maybe this is for the best." I sat frozen, my hand gripping the edge of the tablecloth. The turkey on my plate was still steaming, but I felt ice cold. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but fury. Slowly, I pushed my chair back and stood up in the smug silence. "You actually planned this?" Vanessa smiled, unmistakably victorious. "You've always been a thorn in everyone's side. Always so cold, distant, acting like you're better than us." They didn't respond, just nodded slowly, then bent down and picked up my purse. "I guess if I'm no longer family, then these won't be necessary." I placed a thick folder on the table. The sound it made was soft, but it sliced through the tension like a blade. Vanessa flinched. "What's this?" I crossed my arms, leaned back, and locked eyes with her. "Why don't you take a look?" The moment she flipped the first page, I saw it. That instant when her smile shattered like glass hitting tile. Her face turned pale. Her hands trembled as she turned to the next page. Then she shrieked, a sharp sound that made little Ellie burst into tears. Everyone stood up. Joel, Vanessa's husband, snatched the folder. Seconds later, he turned to me, his face drained of color. Is this real?" I nodded. Every number, every message, every lie. The holiday table became a silent battleground. Vanessa stood frozen, eyes still processing what she had read. The folder lay open, several pages now scattered on the floor from her shaking hands. No one said a word. The ticking wall clock and Ellie's sniffles on Aunt Carol's lap were the only sounds left. How did you get all of this? Vanessa's voice cracked. I stepped toward the table, my voice steady, calmer than I expected, because I knew one day you'd do something you couldn't take back. Joel picked up one of the fallen pages. It showed a screenshot of a bank transfer, $2,800 from my account into one under Vanessa's name, right after she tearfully claimed Joel had lost his job. And this? Joel asked, voice low but sharp. 3 nights at the Grand Hill Hotel, charged to my card, booked under Alyssa Green. Vanessa opened her mouth, but couldn't form words. My mother tried to interject, but I raised my hand. I'm not done. I bent down, pulled out another set of papers, and slid them toward my father. These are for you. A full breakdown of everything I paid for your hospital bills after your fall last year. Itemized, receipts included. My father stared at the papers, his face unreadable, but his hand trembled slightly on the table. Then I turned to my mother. And here's a screenshot of your bank transaction from March 14th, $2,200. I wired you to cover urgent credit card debt. My mother jumped in defensive. Why are you bringing this up now? We're family. That money was given out of love. What kind of love mocks me, excludes me, and then votes me off the dinner table? I cut her off, eyes locked. Not one of you ever apologized. None of you ever considered paying back a single dollar. I've been nothing but a walking wallet. Luke spoke up weakly. Isla, maybe we shouldn't have clapped. We just didn't realize it was this serious. I turned to him calm, but razor sharp. You clapped when I was kicked out of the family. You laughed when Vanessa insulted me in front of Ellie. You were silent every year I supported everyone, so don't pretend to be innocent now. The silence in the room grew heavier as I pulled out my phone. Since we're being honest, let's go through everything, shall we? I opened my notes app, the one I'd been quietly updating for years. March 2021. Vanessa needed $5,000 for Joel's medical emergency. Funny how that same weekend, they were posting beach vacation photos from Cancun. Vanessa's face turned red. Those were old photos. Really? I swiped to show time-stamped hotel receipts. The Grand Sunset Resort seems to disagree. Posted by Alyssa Green, your favorite alias. Joel turned to Vanessa, his expression darkening. You told me your friend paid for that trip. I continued, my voice steady. July 2022. Mom's desperate call about property taxes. $3,200 transferred. August 2022. Dad's car repair. $1,800. September 2022. Vanessa's business investment of $7,000, which actually funded her shopping spree at Nordstrom. My mother tried to interrupt. Sweetheart, every family helps each other. Let me finish. I cut her off. December 2022. Christmas gifts for everyone. January 2023. Ellie's private school deposit. February 2023. Dad's hospital bills. March 2023. Vanessa's emergency house repair. April 2023. Mom's credit card debt. May 2023. Stop. Vanessa screamed, her mascara starting to run. Why are you doing this? I looked at her calmly. Because you all just voted to kick me out of the family. So let's make sure everyone knows exactly what they're voting away. I turned to my father. Remember when you bragged to Uncle Steve about paying off your medical debt yourself? showing the transfer receipts from my account. Dad's face turned ashen. Uncle Steve looked between us, confusion turning to understanding. Or how about when Vanessa won Employee of the Year at her company? I continued. Should we tell everyone about the $12,000 investment I made in her boss's wife's startup that mysteriously got her the nomination? The room was dead silent now. Even little Ellie had stopped crying, sensing the tension. And Mom, I turned to her. Remember that fundraiser you organized for the church? The one where you were praised for your generous anonymous donation? Would you like to tell everyone who actually made that donation? My mother's hand started shaking. I meant to pay you back. No, you didn't, I said softly. None of you did, because you never saw me as family. I was just a convenient ATM with a guilty conscience. Aunt Carol, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. But why did you keep giving if they treated you this way? I smiled sadly, because I kept hoping that one day, just one day, someone would say, thank you, and mean it. That someone would acknowledge me as more than just a walking checkbook. I pulled out one final document. This is a complete record of every loan, every gift, every financial support I've provided over the past 5 years. Total amount, $178,432. The number hung in the air like a guillotine. But don't worry, I continued, my voice ice cold. Since I'm no longer family, I already contacted my lawyer. Every transaction will be treated as what it actually was, an unpaid loan. You have 30 days to start repayment, or we can discuss terms in court. Joel collapsed into his chair. We can't pay that back. Not my problem anymore, I replied. After all, I'm not family, remember? The room erupted into chaos. Vanessa started sobbing, mascara running down her cheeks. Joel was frantically scrolling through their joint bank account on his phone. My mother had her head in her hands, while my father just sat there, staring at the pile of receipts like they were written in a language he couldn't understand. You can't do this, Vanessa choked out between sobs. We're your family. I let out a hollow laugh. Funny how I'm family again when you need money. 10 minutes ago, you were leading the charge to kick me out. But Ellie's school, she started. Should have thought about that before the vote. I cut her off. I'm sure you can find another private school that costs less than $30,000 a year, or maybe sell some of those designer bags I inadvertently funded. My father finally found his voice. Isla, be reasonable. We can't possibly pay back that amount. I turned to him slowly. Remember last month when I asked to borrow $200 for car repairs? You said, and I quote, "It's time you learn to handle your own problems." Well, Dad, it's time you all learned to handle yours. But the hospital bills, he stammered, are now your responsibility. I finished, just like they should have been from the start. My mother tried a different approach. Sweetheart, we made a mistake. We were emotional. Can't we just forget this happened? Like you forgot about the $15,000 I gave you for home repairs? The money you actually spent on that luxury cruise? I pulled out another receipt. The one you told everyone was won in a radio contest. The color drained from her face. Aunt Carol, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly stood up. I think I need to leave. Oh no, I said, pulling out another folder. You might want to stay for this part. Remember that investment opportunity you pitched me last Christmas? The one that turned out to be a pyramid scheme? She froze mid-step. I have copies of all our conversations, the wire transfers, And I smiled coldly. The very interesting emails you sent to your friends bragging about how you'd found an easy mark in your naive niece. Luke, who had been unusually quiet, tried to slip away from the table. "Leaving so soon, cousin?" I called out. "Don't you want to explain to everyone how you managed to afford that new truck? The one you bought right after I loaned you money for your sick dog's surgery." He slumped back into his chair. I stood up, gathering my things. "You have 30 days to start repayment. My lawyer will contact each of you with payment plans based on the amount owed. If you choose not to comply, we'll handle this legally." "But what about holidays?" my mother asked weakly. "Family gatherings?" "You voted, remember?" I replied. "I'm not family anymore. I'm just a creditor collecting on bad debts." Vanessa made one last desperate attempt. "Please, Isla. Think about Ellie. She loves her school." I looked at my niece, who was watching everything with wide, confused eyes. "Maybe you should have thought about Ellie before you taught her it's okay to mock and exclude people who help you." I walked to the door, then turned back one last time. "Oh, and one more thing. I've already frozen all my accounts and credit cards. No more emergency calls. No more urgent transfers. No more silent ATM at your beck and call." The silence that followed was deafening. As I stepped out into the cool November air, my phone started buzzing with messages and calls. I blocked them all, one by one. In my car, I found an old photo tucked in the visor. Last year's Thanksgiving, everyone smiling, pretending to be the perfect family. I took it down and dropped it in the trash. 3 days later, my lawyer sent out the official notices. Within a week, Vanessa had to pull Ellie out of private school. My mother's credit cards were declined at her favorite stores. My father started getting calls from the hospital about payment plans. They tried everything: guilt trips through distant relatives, tearful voicemails, even showing up at my office. But I held firm. Years of manipulation and entitlement had finally met their match in cold, hard legal documentation. 6 months later, I sat in my new apartment across town, reading their first mandatory payment notifications. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about consequences, about learning that actions have real repercussions. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ellie, using her friend's phone. "Aunt Isla, I miss you. Mom says we can't talk to you anymore, but I wanted you to know I understand now. They were mean to you. I'm sorry I didn't say anything." I smiled sadly and saved her message. Maybe there was hope for the next generation. Maybe they'd learn what the adults never did: that family isn't about what you can take, but what you freely give. And sometimes, the strongest love is knowing when to walk away. The following Thanksgiving, I had dinner with friends who became family. No hidden agendas. No financial manipulation, just genuine care and respect. As we shared meals and stories, I realized that sometimes losing a toxic family is the first step to finding your real one. And that folder? I keep it locked away, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that self-respect costs more than any amount of money, and that sometimes the most expensive lesson is learning who doesn't deserve you. The first time I secretly paid my parents' mortgage, I was sitting in my car outside their bank, hands trembling as I transferred $2,800 from my private account. Dad had just lost his job of 23 years. Mom's arthritis was getting worse, and my brother Michael was too busy finding himself in his 3rd year of grad school to notice our family was falling apart. That was 3 years ago. Now, I stood in our kitchen, washing dishes from another tense family dinner, listening to Michael complain about how I was taking advantage of our parents' generosity by still living at home at 28. "It's embarrassing," he declared, lounging on the couch while scrolling through his phone. "All my friends ask why my sister can't get her life together." I scrubbed harder at a pot, saying nothing. Let him think I was struggling. Let him believe I couldn't afford to move out. The truth was far more complicated. "Sarah," Mom called softly from her chair, her hands working at her knitting despite the pain. "You know you're always welcome here." Michael scoffed. "Mom, you're enabling her. She needs to grow up, get a real job instead of that online whatever she does." That whatever was my tech company, now valued at just over $40 million. But Michael didn't need to know that. None of them did, not yet. "I contribute to the household," I said quietly, drying my hands. "What? Buying groceries sometimes? Doing dishes?" "That's what teenagers do for allowance." Michael stood up, his 6-foot frame towering over me. "Meanwhile, I'm about to finish my PhD. I'm going to be a professor. I'll be able to really help the family." I bit back a laugh. His student loans could buy a small island. Dad shuffled in from the garage, looking older than his 60 years. The layoff had aged him, turned his hair gray, bent his shoulders with worry. He tried to smile, but I saw the strain around his eyes. "Everything okay in here?" "No, Dad, it's not okay." Michael turned to face him. "We need to talk about Sarah. She's almost 30, still living at home, barely working. It's not right." Dad sighed, sinking into his chair. "Michael, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time. Look at this place. We're barely keeping up with repairs. Mom needs better medical care. And we've got a perfectly capable adult just freeloading." Mom's knitting needles went still. "Michael, that's enough." But he was just getting started. I'd seen this building for weeks, ever since he'd come home for an extended visit after his graduate housing fell through. His own failures were eating at him, and he needed someone to blame. "No, it's not enough. Sarah needs to hear this. You think I don't notice how tight things are? How you and Dad are struggling? Meanwhile, she sits in her room all day, working on her computer, probably just watching Netflix. I was actually on video calls with my development team in Singapore, but sure, Netflix sounded about right. I pay my way," I said softly. "With what money?" He laughed harshly. "Your little web design business, please. I saw your car, 10 years old and dented. You can barely afford gas." That car was a deliberate choice, like the simple clothes I wore, the lack of flashy accessories, the careful appearance of just getting by. I'd learned early that success is easier to build when no one's watching. "You don't know everything about my finances, Michael." "I know enough. God, it makes me sick seeing you take advantage like this. Mom and Dad are too nice to say it, but I'm not. You need to grow up, get a real job, move out." "Michael, please." Mom's voice shook. "Your sister helps in ways you don't see." If she only knew how true that was. The mortgage payments were just the start. I paid off their credit cards, set up a private medical fund for Mom's treatments, and quietly arranged for the home repairs they thought their insurance had mysteriously decided to cover. "What ways?" Michael demanded. "Does she have some secret fortune we don't know about?" He laughed at his own joke. I said nothing, just pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. 3 years of transactions, all carefully documented. Every payment, every transfer, Every bill quietly handled, while they thought they were just managing to scrape by. Actually, I started, but Michael cut me off. No, I'm done listening to excuses. This is our parents' house, our family home, not your permanent crash pad. His voice rose to a shout. Get out of our parents' house. Well, we're just a freeloader. The room went silent except for Mom's sharp intake of breath. Dad's hands gripped his armchair, and something in me finally snapped. Interesting choice of words, Michael. I turned my phone screen toward him. Should I stop the monthly payments I've been making for the last 3 years? He squinted at the screen, then his eyes went wide. Mom started crying softly in her chair. What? What is this? Bank records, I said calmly. Every mortgage payment since Dad lost his job. Every medical bill for Mom's treatments. The new roof last summer. The property taxes. All paid from my account. That's impossible. He grabbed my phone, scrolling frantically through the transactions. These amounts, you can't. Can't what? Afford it? Funny how appearances can be deceiving. I took my phone back. You never asked what I actually do, Michael. You just assumed. Dad stood up slowly. Sarah, all this time. I nodded. You needed help. I could help. It seemed simple. But how? Michael sputtered. Your little web business is now one of the largest independent tech security firms in North America. I smiled slightly. Turns out all those hours in my room weren't spent on Netflix after all. Mom's tears flowed freely now. Why didn't you tell us? Because you needed to focus on healing, not worrying about paying bills. And because I looked at Michael. Some people need to learn the hard way not to judge what they don't understand. This is a joke, Michael said, but his voice wavered. Some kind of trick. Would you like to see the company financials too? The property deeds? Or maybe just next month's mortgage statement? I pulled up another screen. Oh look, it's due next week. Should I process the payment? Or would you like to handle it? He fell back onto the couch, face pale. Sarah, Dad's voice cracked. We never meant to. We should have. It's okay, Dad. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I could. Because that's what family really means. Helping each other without keeping score. I looked pointedly at Michael, who couldn't meet my eyes. But since we're being honest now, I took a deep breath. There's something else you should know about the house. The silence in our living room was deafening. Mom had stopped crying, but her hands clutched her knitting needles like anchors. Dad stood frozen by his chair, and Michael looked like someone had just pulled the world out from under his feet. What about the house? Dad finally asked. I took a deep breath. Remember last year when the bank called about refinancing? That wasn't exactly what happened. Sarah, Mom's voice trembled. What did you do? I pulled another document up on my phone. The house was underwater. The previous mortgage was predatory. Interest rates set to spike. Balloon payments coming due. They were going to foreclose. Dad sank back into his chair, but they offered us new terms. No, I said gently. I bought the house, paid it off completely. The monthly payments you thought were going to the bank. They've been going into a savings account I set up for your retirement. The sound of shattering glass made everyone jump. Michael had dropped his water glass, shards spreading across the hardwood floor I'd had replaced last spring. You own our house, he whispered. Technically, It's in a trust. For Mom and Dad's benefit. They can live here as long as they want. Never have to worry about payments or maintenance. I looked at my brother, and no one can ever threaten to kick anyone out. Michael's face flushed dark red. The irony of his earlier outburst wasn't lost on him. Why keep this secret? Dad asked. All this time, we thought we were barely hanging on. Because you needed to feel normal, I said. After the layoff, after Mom's diagnosis, you needed stability, not charity. So I found a way to help without damaging your dignity. Dignity. Michael laughed sharply. You've been playing us like puppets, watching us struggle, letting us think. Letting you think what? I cut in. That I was a failure. That I needed your constant judgment and criticism. That somehow your unfinished PhD made you more successful than my little web business. He flinched. The company is worth $40 million. By the way, I added quietly. We're expanding into Europe next month. That's what those late-night calls in my room were about, coordinating with our teams in London and Berlin. Mom's knitting needles clattered to the floor. 40 million? Give or take a few million depending on the market. I shrugged. But that's not important right now. What's important is that you understand I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I choose to be. But your car, Michael protested weakly. Your clothes. Our choices. I finished. I drive that car because it's reliable and paid for. I wear simple clothes because I'm comfortable in them. Not everyone needs to show off their success, Michael. Dad cleared his throat. The medical bills, your mother's treatments, all taken care of, including the experimental therapy they said insurance wouldn't cover. I smiled at Mom. That's why you've been feeling better lately. You've been getting the best care available, not just what we could afford. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks, but these weren't from sadness. I don't understand, Michael said, his voice small. Why let me treat you like that? Why not just tell me to shut up? Because you needed to learn something. I walked over to help him clean up the broken glass. Success isn't about appearances. It's not about titles or degrees or what other people think. It's about what you actually do, how you help others, how you build something real. As I carefully picked up the glass pieces, I continued. Every time you mocked my job, criticized my choices, tried to make me feel small, I was signing contracts worth more than your student loans. Every time you bragged about your future professor's salary, I was paying the property taxes on this house. Sarah, Mom interrupted, the savings account you mentioned has enough to cover your expenses for the next 30 years. I said, conservatively invested, professionally managed. You never have to worry about money again. Dad started to speak, but his voice caught. He tried again. We should have seen. No, I said firmly. You shouldn't have. That was the point. You needed to heal, to focus on each other, to get through the hard times without pride getting in the way. I could help, so I did. But now, Michael asked. Why tell us now? I stood up, glass shards tinkling in my palm. Because it's time. Because Mom's health is better, Dad's starting his consulting business, and you. I looked at him directly. You need to understand that the world is bigger than your assumptions. The grandfather clock in the hall, another quiet repair I'd arranged, chimed 9 times. Outside, a car pulled into our driveway, headlights sweeping across the living room windows. That's probably Jamie, I said, checking my phone. My CFO. We have some contracts to review. Here. Michael asked incredulously. Why not? It's my house. I smiled slightly. Well, technically, Mom and Dad's house. I just maintain it. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Mom started to get up, but I gestured for her to stay seated. There's one more thing you should know, I said, heading for the door. About that graduate housing that fell through. The doorbell chimed again as I reached for the handle. Behind me, I could feel my family's eyes following my every move, still trying to process everything they'd learned in the last hour. Jamie stood on the porch, elegant in her business suit despite the late hour, tablet in hand. Good evening, Ms. Anderson. I have those property documents you requested. Michael's sharp intake of breath told me he'd caught the significance of those words. Property documents? He asked weakly. I turned back to my family, letting Jamie step into the foyer. Remember how your graduate housing mysteriously fell through last month? Right after that incident with the department head? Michael's face went pale. He'd been bragging for weeks about telling off his supervisor, claiming academic integrity when really he'd missed several teaching deadlines. The University Housing Board didn't cancel your contract, I continued. I bought the building. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Mom's knitting needles, which she'd retrieved from the floor, went still. You? What? Michael collapsed onto the couch. Anderson Properties LLC purchased the graduate housing complex 3 weeks ago, Jamie explained professionally, along with several other university-adjacent properties. Dad's eyes widened. Anderson, your mother's maiden name. I nodded. It's easier to do business without the family connection sometimes, especially in real estate. So you kicked me out? Michael's voice cracked. To prove a point. No, I said softly. I terminated your housing contract because you were making life hell for the maintenance staff, ignoring building regulations, and treating the property manager, my employee, like she was beneath you. He flinched, remembering his words to the middle-aged woman who tried to talk to him about noise complaints. Actions have consequences, Michael. Even for family, especially for family. Jamie cleared her throat delicately. Should we review the quarterly reports now? In a moment, I turned back to my family. There's one last thing we need to discuss. Mom leaned forward in her chair. More secrets? No more secrets, I promised, but some choices to make. I sat down in the armchair opposite Michael, smoothing my simple skirt, a deliberate choice that now felt almost like a costume I no longer needed to wear. This house, your medical care, the savings account, it's all set up, irreversible. You'll never have to worry about money again. I looked at my parents, but Michael's situation is different. My brother stiffened. You have 2 options, I continued, meeting his eyes. Option 1. You can move back into graduate housing. Different building, same complex. Fresh start, clean slate. Keep working on your PhD, but with the understanding that actions have consequences and privilege comes with responsibility. And option 2, he asked quietly. Come work for me. Learn the business from the ground up, like I did. No shortcuts, no special treatment. Start in customer service, move up based on merit. Customer service? He almost choked. But I'm almost a PhD. And I'm a CEO who still answers client calls when needed, I replied. Success isn't a title, Michael. It's what you do with it. Jamie stepped forward, tablet ready. The employment contract is prepared, if you're interested. Standard entry-level position, full benefits, opportunity for advancement based on performance. Michael looked at the tablet, then at me. then at our parents. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're my brother," I said simply. "And because everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. Even arrogant big brothers who think success only looks one way." Mom's eyes filled with tears again. "Sarah, we never knew. You weren't supposed to know," I reminded her gently. "But now you do. And things will be different." "Different how?" Dad asked. "For starters, no more pretending. I'll still live here. When I'm not traveling for work, because I want to, not because I have to. Mom's medical treatments will continue, but now you'll understand why money isn't an issue. And Michael," I turned back to my brother, "you'll make your choice. PhD or customer service. But either way, you'll do it honestly, understanding exactly who's providing the opportunity." Michael sat quietly for a long moment, staring at his hands. Finally, he looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Respect. "Customer service," he said quietly. "I want to learn." "Really learn?" I nodded, hiding my surprise. Maybe he could grow after all. "Jamie, the contract, please." I took the tablet, signed it, and handed it to Michael. "You start Monday. Don't be late." As he signed, his hand trembling slightly, Mom spoke up. "What about your company? Your real life?" "This is my real life, Mom. All of it. The company, the properties, this house, this family. I just compartmentalized for a while. Now we can be honest." "And the car?" Dad asked, a slight smile playing at his lips. I laughed. "The car stays. It reminds me where I started. Where we all started." Jamie cleared her throat again. "Ms. Anderson, about those contracts?" "Right." I stood up. "Family meeting adjourned. Michael, HR will email you orientation details. Mom, your next treatment is Thursday. I'll drive you. Dad, let's talk about your consulting business tomorrow. I have some contacts who might be interested." As I followed Jamie to my home office, formerly known as my little bedroom, I heard Michael ask quietly, "The building manager I was rude to, is she still?" "She's your new supervisor." I called back without turning around. "I suggest you practice your apology before Monday." The sound of his groan followed me down the hall, but under it, I heard something else. Mom's laughter, Dad's chuckle, the sounds of a family finding its footing in a new reality. Sometimes the biggest success isn't in what you build, but in how you reveal it. And sometimes the hardest person to prove yourself to isn't your family, but yourself. I'd done both. Now it was time to see what we could build together in the light of truth instead of the shadow of assumptions.
My name is Daniel Foster, and at 28 I never expected a casual lunch meeting to become the moment my entire family finally saw who I really was. Sitting across from my older brother Jake at Romano's Italian bistro, watching his confident smirk fade into horror, I realized that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply being yourself when no one expects it. But before I tell you about that lunch and what happened when Jake's boss Richard Sterling walked through those restaurant doors, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that like button if you've ever been the underestimated sibling who quietly built an empire while everyone was looking the other way. Growing up as the younger foster brother meant living in Jake's carefully crafted shadow. He was everything our parents valued: aggressive, confident, socially connected, and relentlessly ambitious. While I preferred books to parties and strategy games to sports, Jake dominated every room he entered with his loud personality and natural charisma. Our childhood home in Westchester County reflected this dynamic perfectly. Jake's achievements covered the refrigerator and hallway walls: varsity football captain, homecoming king, student body president. My academic awards and chess tournament victories were acknowledged with polite nods before conversation inevitably returned to Jake's latest social conquest or athletic achievement. Our father, Robert Foster, owned a successful insurance brokerage and prized the kind of assertive networking skills that came naturally to Jake. Our mother, Patricia, taught high school and appreciated Jake's leadership qualities and easy charm with teachers and administrators. Jake's going places, Dad would tell his golf buddies. Natural-born leader, just like his old man. When attention turned to me, the comments were more cautious. Daniel's the quiet one. Smart enough, but lacks Jake's drive. The pattern established early and persisted through high school. Jake excelled at making connections, building relationships, and positioning himself at the center of every important social circle. He dated the popular girls, befriended the influential families, and graduated with a network that immediately opened doors in the business world. I took a different approach. While Jake was attending parties and building his social media presence, I spent hours reading business books, studying market trends, and teaching myself programming languages. I found more satisfaction in understanding how systems worked than in working the system itself. The divergence became more pronounced during college. Jake attended our father's alma mater, joining the same fraternity and studying business administration with a focus on sales and marketing. His college experience was exactly what our parents expected. Networking events, internships at prestigious firms, and a social life that expanded his professional connections. I chose a smaller school with a strong computer science program. While Jake's Instagram showed fraternity parties and spring break trips, I was building websites for local businesses and learning about emerging technologies. My social media presence was minimal, but my bank account was growing from freelance programming projects. The family dinners during those years followed a predictable script. Jake would regale everyone with stories of his internships, job interviews, and networking successes. Our parents hung on every word, asking detailed questions and offering advice based on their own professional experiences. When conversation turned to me, I offered brief updates about my coursework and avoided mentioning the small software consulting business I'd started. My achievements felt incompatible with their definition of success, so I learned to keep them private. The dynamic reached its peak during Jake's senior year. He landed a coveted position at Sterling and Associates, a prestigious consulting firm in Manhattan. The starting salary was impressive, the company's reputation was stellar, and our parents treated his job offer like a family victory. "That's my boy," Dad announced at the celebration dinner. "Corner office by 30, I guarantee it." Jake embraced the role perfectly. He moved to a trendy apartment in Brooklyn, bought expensive suits, and cultivated the image of a rising young executive. His social media presence became a carefully curated showcase of professional success. Networking events, client dinners, company retreats. Meanwhile, I graduated quietly with a computer science degree and continued building my consulting business. I specialized in developing custom software solutions for mid-sized companies, work that was lucrative but largely invisible to my family. While Jake was posting photos from corporate retreats, I was signing contracts with clients who valued results over relationships. The family gatherings during this period were particularly challenging. Jake would arrive in his BMW, wearing designer clothes and carrying the latest iPhone. He'd spend dinner describing his projects, his clients, and his rapid advancement within Sterling and Associates. "Just made senior consultant," he announced at Thanksgiving during his second year. Youngest person in company history to reach that level. Our parents beamed with pride while I offered congratulations and changed the subject. I didn't mention that my business had just signed a six-figure contract with a manufacturing company, or that I was considering expanding to serve enterprise clients. The contrast in our lifestyles became a source of family concern. While Jake lived visibly well, expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, designer everything, I maintained a modest apartment and drove a reliable used car. To our parents, this confirmed their assessment of our relative success levels. "Daniel needs to network more," Mom would say during their private conversations, which I occasionally overheard. Jake could introduce him to people, help him find better opportunities. The assumption that I needed Jake's help stung, but I preferred building something substantial to building something impressive. My client base was growing through referrals and quality work, not through networking events and social connections. By Jake's third year at Sterling and Associates, the family dynamic had solidified into a predictable pattern. He was the success story, the golden child whose career validated our parents' values and expectations. I was the underachiever, the younger brother who'd failed to capitalize on his potential. This narrative reached its crescendo at our parents' anniversary dinner last spring. The entire extended family gathered at Romano's Italian Bistro, the same restaurant where everything would change 6 months later. Jake arrived late as always, making a grand entrance that drew attention from nearby tables. He'd just returned from a company retreat in the Bahamas and couldn't stop talking about his projects, his bonus structure, and his trajectory toward partnership track. Our aunts and uncles listened with admiration while our cousins asked questions about his glamorous corporate life. When attention briefly turned to me, I mentioned that business was going well and left it at that. But Jake, emboldened by wine and the admiring audience, decided to elaborate on our different paths. "Dan's still doing his computer thing," he said with condescending affection. "Small stuff, local clients. Nothing wrong with staying small, right, Dan?" The comment drew uncomfortable chuckles from relatives who weren't sure how to respond. I smiled and nodded, accustomed to his casual dismissals of my work. But Jake wasn't finished. Perhaps sensing an opportunity to reinforce his position as the family's success story, he leaned back in his chair and delivered the line that would make our next encounter so particularly satisfying. "You'll never be successful like me, Dan," he said with the confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. "Some people are just built for bigger things." The table fell silent. Even our parents looked uncomfortable with the bluntness of his statement. But Jake seemed pleased with himself, having clearly established the hierarchy in front of our entire extended family. I took a sip of water and smiled. "You might be right, Jake." What I didn't tell him, what I hadn't told anyone, was that earlier that week I'd signed the largest contract in my company's history. Sterling and Associates, Jake's prestigious employer, had hired my firm to overhaul their entire client management system. The project was worth $800,000 and would take 8 months to complete. The irony was delicious, but I kept it to myself. Jake had no idea that his own company had become my biggest client, or that his boss Richard Sterling had personally approved my proposal after a competitive bidding process. The months following that anniversary dinner were productive but quiet. I focused on delivering exceptional work for Sterling and Associates while maintaining my other client relationships. The project was complex, integrating multiple software systems, streamlining workflows, and creating custom applications that would save the company hundreds of thousands annually. Richard Sterling proved to be an ideal client. Unlike Jake, who valued appearance over substance, Richard was impressed by results and efficiency. Our weekly progress meetings were focused and productive, with Richard frequently expressing appreciation for my team's professionalism and expertise. "This is exactly what we needed," Richard told me during one of our sessions. "Your approach is saving us months of development time and delivering capabilities we didn't even know were possible." What made the situation particularly interesting was that Jake remained completely unaware of my involvement with his company. Sterling and Associates was large enough that individual consultants didn't interact with every department, and my project was handled through the IT and operations divisions rather than Jake's client services team. Jake continued his pattern of family updates, regaling everyone with stories of his client successes and professional advancement. He'd been promoted again and was now managing a small team, a development that our parents celebrated as evidence of his leadership potential. Meanwhile, I was quietly revolutionizing the technology infrastructure that enabled his entire department to function effectively. The client management system I was building would directly impact his daily work, but he had no idea who was creating it. The project progressed smoothly through the summer and early fall. My team delivered each milestone on schedule and within budget, earning increasingly positive feedback from Sterling and Associates' executive team. Richard began discussing additional projects and hinting at a long-term partnership that could expand my business significantly. But I still hadn't told my family about the Sterling and Associates contract. The combination of Jake's arrogance and my parents' obvious favoritism made me reluctant to share achievements that might be dismissed or minimized. I'd learned to let my work speak for itself rather than seeking external validation. The turning point came in November when Richard Sterling suggested we meet for lunch to discuss the next phase of our partnership. He proposed Romano's Italian Bistro, the same restaurant where Jake had declared I'd never be successful like him. "It's convenient to our office," Richard explained, and they have a private dining room where we can discuss confidential details. I agreed, amused by the coincidence but not expecting any particular drama. It was simply a business lunch with an important client, the kind of meeting that had become routine as my company grew. What I didn't anticipate was that Jake would choose the same restaurant for his own business lunch that day. The meeting with Richard proceeded exactly as planned. We discussed the final phase of the current project, outlined specifications for 2 additional contracts, and negotiated terms for a preferred vendor agreement that would make Sterling and Associates my anchor client for the foreseeable future. "Your work has exceeded every expectation," Richard said as we reviewed the contracts. "The efficiency gains alone will save us over $300,000 annually, and that's before we calculate the improved client satisfaction metrics." We were finalizing details when I noticed a familiar figure at a table across the dining room. Jake sat with his back to us, gesticulating enthusiastically while talking to what appeared to be a potential client. His body language radiated the confident energy I'd observed since childhood, leaning forward, making expansive gestures dominating the conversation. I mentioned to Richard that my brother worked for his company, pointing discreetly toward Jake's table. "Jake Foster?" Richard asked, following my gaze. "Solid performer, good with clients. He's in our business development division." "He's mentioned you," I said carefully. "Speaks very highly of the company culture and leadership." Richard smiled. "We're proud of our team. Jake's contributed to some significant client wins this year." As we finished our business discussion and prepared to leave, Richard suggested introducing himself to Jake. "Always good to connect with family members," he explained. "Plus, I'd like to thank him personally for his recent work on the Morrison account." I agreed, curious to see Jake's reaction but not expecting the dramatic scene that was about to unfold. We approached Jake's table just as he was launching into what sounded like a familiar story about his rapid advancement within the company. His lunch companion, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, listened with the polite attention of someone evaluating a potential business partner. "Jake," Richard said warmly, interrupting the conversation. "Good to see you outside the office." Jake looked up, startled to see his boss in the restaurant. His confident expression shifted to professional deference as he quickly stood to shake Richard's hand. "Mr. Sterling," Jake said, his voice notably more subdued than it had been moments earlier. "What a pleasant surprise." "I'd like you to meet someone," Richard continued, gesturing toward me. "This is Daniel Foster, the software consultant I've been telling everyone about. He's the genius behind our new client management system." Jake's eyes widened as he processed the introduction. "Daniel Foster?" he repeated, looking between Richard and me with growing confusion. "Dan's my brother," I said simply, extending my hand with a professional smile. The color drained from Jake's face as the implications hit him. His lunch companion watched with interest, clearly sensing the tension but unaware of its source. "Your brother?" Richard asked, delighted by the coincidence. "Jake, you never mentioned your brother was running the consulting firm that's been transforming our operations." Jake opened his mouth but no words came out. I could see him frantically trying to reconcile his image of his unsuccessful younger brother with Richard's description of a valued business partner. "Daniel's company has been absolutely exceptional," Richard continued, either unaware of Jake's distress or choosing to ignore it. "Professional, innovative, ahead of schedule on every deliverable. We're signing an expanded contract today that will make them our primary technology partner." Jake's lunch companion looked impressed. "Software consulting," he said, extending his hand to me. "That's a growing field. You must be doing very well for yourself." "Business has been good," I replied modestly, shaking his hand while watching Jake struggle to process what was happening. Richard checked his watch. "I should get back to the office, but Jake, make sure you give your brother the recognition he deserves. His work is going to revolutionize how we serve our clients." As Richard prepared to leave, he turned back to me. "Daniel, I'll have the contracts reviewed by legal and back to you by Friday. Looking forward to our continued partnership." He shook my hand again, nodded to Jake's lunch companion and headed toward the exit, leaving Jake and me standing beside the table in awkward silence. Jake's companion looked between us with growing curiosity. "So you're the software consultant Sterling was talking about," he said to me. "Impressive client to land." "Sterling and Associates has been great to work with," I replied. Professional organization, clear communication, realistic timelines. Jake finally found his voice. Dan, I had no idea you were working with my company. It came up through normal channels, I said calmly. Competitive bidding process, proposal presentations, the usual client acquisition process. Jake's lunch companion excused himself to take a phone call, leaving us alone at the table. Jake sat down heavily, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been respect. $800,000, Jake said quietly. Richard mentioned the contract value in our team meeting last week. I had no idea that was you. I sat down across from him, the same position we'd occupied during countless family dinners where he dominated the conversation with stories of his professional success. You never asked about my work, I pointed out. You assumed small stuff, local clients, remember? Jake winced at having his own words reflected back to him. But how? When did you? How long have you been building the business? About 6 years. Sterling and Associates isn't my only client, Jake. They're just the most recent. He leaned back in his chair, processing information that clearly challenged everything he thought he knew about our relative success levels. 6 years, he repeated. And our parents never. I don't talk about work at family dinners, I said. You seem to have that covered. The truth of that statement hung between us. 4 years, Jake had monopolized conversations about professional achievement, never leaving space for others to share their own accomplishments. My success had developed quietly without fanfare or family recognition, but it had developed nonetheless. Jake's lunch companion returned, apologizing for the interruption and clearly eager to continue their business discussion. But Jake seemed distracted, glancing at me repeatedly while trying to maintain his professional demeanor. I should let you get back to your meeting, I said, standing to leave. Dan, wait, Jake called after me. Can we talk later? Really talk. I nodded. Call me tonight. We should catch up. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Jake's companion ask, Everything all right? You seem a bit shaken. Jake's response was muffled, but I caught the words, my brother, and didn't realize. The drive back to my office gave me time to process what had just happened. 4 years, I'd built my business and my reputation without family recognition or support. I'd chosen substance over visibility, results over relationships, competence over charisma. Jake's shock at discovering my success revealed how completely he'd dismissed my potential. In his mind, I was still the quiet younger brother who lacked his drive and ambition. The possibility that I might have found a different path to success, one that didn't require his particular combination of networking and self-promotion, had never occurred to him. That evening, Jake called as promised. The conversation was unlike any we'd ever had. I owe you an apology, he began without preamble. Actually, I owe you several apologies. You don't need to, I started, but he interrupted. Yes, I do. What I said at Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner, about you never being successful like me. That was arrogant and wrong, and I'm sorry. I appreciated the directness of his apology, but I was more interested in understanding his perspective. Why did you assume I wasn't doing well? I asked. You never asked about my work, my clients, my income. Jake was quiet for a moment. Because you don't live like you're successful, he said finally. No expensive car, no designer clothes, no flashy apartment. I thought success looked like what I was doing. It was an honest answer, and it revealed something important about how our family had defined and measured achievement. I invest differently, I explained. Business growth, technology, long-term stability rather than short-term appearance. Richard called you a genius, Jake said quietly. In the team meeting when he was talking about the new system. He said we were lucky to find someone with your capabilities. The conversation continued for over an hour. Jake asked detailed questions about my business model, my client base, and my growth trajectory. For the first time, he seemed genuinely interested in understanding my path rather than dismissing it. I've been thinking, he said near the end of our call. Maybe we could collaborate on something. My client relationships, your technical expertise. It was a generous offer, and I appreciated the implicit recognition of my value. But I'd spent years building something independent, something that succeeded on its own merits rather than through family connections. Let me think about it, I said. But Jake? Thanks for asking. That means a lot. The family dynamics began shifting immediately. Jake called our parents that night and told them about our encounter at the restaurant. According to him, they were shocked to learn about my Sterling and Associates contract and embarrassed that they'd been unaware of my professional success. Mom called the next morning, her voice filled with a combination of pride and bewilderment. "Danny, why didn't you tell us about your business?" she asked. "Jake says you're making more money than he is." "I tried to tell you, Mom. But the conversation always focused on Jake's achievements. I learned to keep my work private." The hurt in her voice was evident. "We would have been proud of you. We are proud of you. I know you love me," I said gently. "But you've always been more comfortable celebrating Jake's kind of success. Visible, social, easy to understand. My path was different." Over the following weeks, the family's understanding of my career evolved rapidly. Jake shared details about the Sterling and Associates project with our parents, explaining how my work was improving efficiency across multiple departments. Our father, with his business background, began asking sophisticated questions about my company's structure and growth plans. The Thanksgiving dinner that year was markedly different from previous gatherings. Instead of Jake dominating conversations about his professional life, our extended family asked questions about both of our careers. Jake graciously directed attention to my recent successes, describing the Sterling and Associates project in terms that clearly impressed our relatives. "Dan's the technical genius in the family," Jake told our uncle. "I'm good with people, but he's building systems that change how entire companies operate." It was the first time Jake had publicly acknowledged my expertise, and it marked a fundamental shift in how our family understood our respective contributions. The business relationship with Sterling and Associates continued to grow throughout the winter. Richard introduced me to contacts at other consulting firms, leading to 3 additional major contracts. By spring, I'd hired 4 full-time employees and moved to a larger office space. Jake and I began meeting monthly for lunch, initially to discuss potential collaboration opportunities but eventually just to stay connected as brothers rather than competitors. He shared insights about client relationship management while I helped him understand how technology could enhance his business development efforts. "I wish I'd known about your success earlier," he said during one of our lunches. "Not just because of the business opportunities, but because I missed years of actually knowing my brother." Our conversations revealed how completely we'd misunderstood each other. Jake had interpreted my quietness as lack of ambition, while I'd seen his networking as superficial self-promotion. In reality, we'd both been building successful careers using our different strengths and approaches. The most significant change was in our parents' perspective. They began recognizing that success could take multiple forms, and that their previous focus on Jake's achievements had inadvertently diminished their appreciation for my accomplishments. "We're proud of both our sons," Dad told his golf buddies, a comment that reached me through our small town's reliable gossip network. Different approaches but both successful in their own ways. By summer, my relationship with Sterling and Associates had evolved into a comprehensive technology partnership. Richard recommended my services to other firms in his network, leading to opportunities that would double my company's revenue within 12 months. Jake's career continued thriving as well, but our family gatherings no longer felt like competitions for recognition and approval. We'd learned to celebrate each other's achievements rather than using them to establish hierarchy or validate different definitions of success. The most profound change, though, was in my own confidence. For years, I'd allowed others' expectations to make me doubt the value of my path. Jake's shock at discovering my success forced me to recognize how much I'd internalized his dismissive attitude toward my work. I'd been successful all along, I just hadn't demanded recognition for it. 6 months after that pivotal lunch at Romano's, I was invited to speak at a technology conference about sustainable business growth. The audience included executives from major corporations, and several approached me afterward about potential consulting projects. Among the attendees was Jake, who'd taken a personal day to hear my presentation. Watching him in the audience, proud, supportive, genuinely interested in my expertise, I realized how much our relationship had evolved. After the conference, we drove back to Westchester together for our parents' Sunday dinner. The family dynamics that had once felt oppressive now felt supportive. Our parents asked detailed questions about my presentation and Jake's latest client successes, treating both of us as accomplished professionals whose different paths were equally valuable. Remember when you said I'd never be successful like you? I asked Jake as we pulled into our parents' driveway. He grimaced. One of my less proud moments. You were right though, I said with a smile. I'm not successful like you. I'm successful like me. Jake laughed, understanding the distinction. Much better approach actually. My way requires too much networking. That evening, as our extended family gathered around the dinner table, the conversation flowed naturally between different topics and achievements. Jake described his latest client acquisition while I shared updates about my company's expansion plans. Our parents listened to both with equal interest and pride. The teenager who'd once felt invisible had become an entrepreneur whose work impacted thousands of employees across multiple companies. The quiet brother who'd been dismissed as lacking ambition had built something substantial and lasting. But more importantly, I'd learned that external validation, even from family, was less important than internal conviction. I'd been building success all along. The only thing that changed was others' recognition of it. If you're reading this as the overlooked sibling, the quiet achiever, the one whose path doesn't match others' expectations, remember that success comes in many forms. Build something meaningful, serve others authentically, and trust that the right people will eventually see your value. Sometimes the sweetest moment isn't when you prove others wrong, but when you realize you were right about yourself all along. Have you ever been underestimated by family members who later discovered your true achievements? How did you handle the moment when their perception finally caught up with your reality? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this journey from dismissal to recognition resonated with you. Remember, the people who dismiss your potential today might be calling you sir tomorrow.
The aroma of roasting turkey and simmering tension filled my parents' sprawling Victorian home. I smoothed my simple black dress, bought off the rack at Macy's, a detail my sister-in-law Safia would surely mention later, and took my usual seat at the far end of the dining table. The quiet one spot, as they'd labeled it years ago. Olivia, darling, my mother called from her position of authority near the carved turkey. How's that little office job of yours? Still working those long hours for that, what was it again? Investment firm, Mom, I replied softly. Blackridge Capital. My brother Marcus snorted into his wine glass. She's just a secretary there, he announced to our extended family gathered for Thanksgiving dinner. Pushing papers, answering phones. Real exciting stuff. I took a small sip of water, letting his words roll off me like they had for the past 5 years. 5 years of building something extraordinary while they thought I was just another corporate drone. 5 years of being the family disappointment while quietly becoming one of the most powerful women in tech. At least she has a job, Aunt Patricia offered with a kind of defensive praise that felt more like pity. In this economy, that's something. My cousin David, glued to his phone as usual, barely looked up. Yeah, not everyone can be as successful as Marcus. Didn't your hedge fund just close another major deal? Marcus straightened his designer tie, a gift from the company he thought he'd impressed. If he only knew who really owned that company now. $800 million in new investments, he bragged. Largest deal in the firm's history. I hid my smile behind my napkin. The deal he was so proud of. I'd orchestrated it to one of my shell companies. My brother had spent 3 months negotiating with my team, never realizing his little sister was the one behind it all. Now that's real business, my father declared, beaming at his golden child. Not just pushing papers and getting coffee. Mom nodded in agreement. Olivia dear, perhaps Marcus could help you find a more suitable position. Something with actual growth potential. I thought about the empire I'd built. Quantum Dynamics, a technology company revolutionizing artificial intelligence and machine learning. We didn't just have growth potential. We were reshaping the future. But they didn't know that. They didn't know that the quiet daughter they dismissed had just closed a deal worth more than their combined net worth. "I'm fine where I am," I said quietly. "The work suits me." Sophia, Marcus's trophy wife, rolled her eyes. "That's the problem, Liv. You've always settled for fine. No ambition, no drive. Just sitting quietly in your little cubicle while the rest of us actually make something of ourselves." The room murmured in agreement. Even my younger cousins, who once looked up to me, now saw me through the family's carefully crafted lens of disappointment. Little did they know that tomorrow morning, Fortune magazine would release its annual 500 list, and with it, the carefully maintained facade of Olivia Bennet, humble secretary, would crumble. The thought almost made the turkey taste better. Speaking of success, Marcus continued, swirling his expensive bourbon. "We're closing on the Peterson account next week. Finally managed to outmaneuver that mysterious tech company that's been buying up everything in sight." I nearly choked on my water. The Peterson account, a billion-dollar investment portfolio I'd been quietly acquiring through various subsidiaries. Marcus thought he'd secured it, but the papers finalizing my purchase had been signed this morning. David, still scrolling through his phone, suddenly sat up straighter. His eyes widened as he stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "Holy shit," he whispered, just loud enough to catch everyone's attention. "Language," Aunt Patricia scolded, but David wasn't listening. "Olivia," he said slowly, "why is your face on Fortune's website?" The room went still. Marcus reached for David's phone, but his younger brother held it away, reading aloud instead. "Quantum Dynamics CEO Olivia Bennet joins Fortune 500 list. The secretive founder of the $2 billion tech empire." His voice trailed off as the implications hit. I set down my fork carefully, enjoying the way the color drained from Marcus's face. The way my mother's perfect posture crumbled slightly. The way Sophia's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "$2 billion, my father choked out. "That's impossible. You're his secretary." I smiled, reaching for my bag. "Actually," I said, pulling out a glossy magazine, an advance copy of tomorrow's Fortune issue with my face on the cover, "I think it's closer to $3 billion now. The market's been quite favorable lately." The turkey was definitely getting cold, but I'd never enjoyed a Thanksgiving dinner more. The silence that followed my revelation was interrupted only by the soft thud of Sophia's wine glass hitting the tablecloth, spreading a crimson stain across my mother's pristine white linen. "This is a joke," Marcus finally managed, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Some kind of prank." I pulled out my phone, opening the banking app that few knew existed, a private platform for ultra-high net worth individuals. "Would you like to see the numbers, brother? Or perhaps we should discuss the Peterson account you think you're closing next week?" His face went from red to white faster than the spreading wine stain. "The Peterson account? That was you. Quantum Dynamics owns 60% of the investment portfolio you've been chasing," I said calmly. "We acquired it this morning. Congratulations on your negotiating skills, though. You only overpaid by about $200 million. Dad's hands gripped the edge of the table. But your job at Blackridge Capital is real," I confirmed. "I do work there. I just didn't mention that I own it. Bought it 3 years ago through a holding company. Marcus has technically been working for me this whole time." The turkey was completely forgotten now. Aunt Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. David was frantically Googling my name, his eyes growing wider with each new article he found. "Oh my God," he whispered. "The mysterious tech CEO everyone's been talking about. The woman who revolutionized artificial intelligence. That's you. Mom found her voice, though it trembled slightly. Why didn't you tell us? We're family. I met her gaze steadily. Like you told me I'd never succeed in business. Like Marcus told me to stick to answering phones. Like Safia suggested I focus on finding a husband because I clearly wasn't cut out for the corporate world. We were trying to protect you, Dad protested weakly. No, I corrected. You were trying to control me, to keep me in the box you created. The quiet one. The failure. The one who couldn't possibly build something extraordinary. My phone buzzed. A message from my CFO. Our stock just jumped another 12% in after-hours trading. The Peterson acquisition is already paying off. Marcus pushed back from the table abruptly. I need to call my office. They're closed for Thanksgiving, I said mildly. But don't worry. The termination papers won't be delivered until Monday. He froze. Termination? Quantum Dynamics has a strict policy against insider trading, I explained, pulling up another document on my phone. Your recent activities with the Thompson Fund violated several SEC regulations. As your employer, through Blackridge Capital, I'm obligated to report it. You're firing me? His voice rose. Your own brother. No, Marcus. I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference. Safia stood up, designer dress rustling. You vindictive little. Careful, I interrupted. Your prenup has a morality clause. Marcus's illegal trading could void it completely. Though given his imminent legal troubles, there might not be much left to claim anyway. The room erupted in chaos. Mom was crying silently. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. My cousins were furiously whispering among themselves, while Aunt Patricia appeared to be praying. I stood, smoothing my simple dress. I should go. I have an early meeting tomorrow. We're acquiring another AI firm in Singapore. Time zones, you know. Wait, Dad called out. Please. We can fix this, as a family. I turned back, my hand on the doorframe. Family? Was it family when you cut off my college fund because I chose computer science instead of business administration? When you told everyone I was having a breakdown after I quit my first job to start coding? When you bet against my company in its early days, hoping I'd fail? We didn't know, Mom whispered. Exactly. You never asked. You never saw me. You were too busy celebrating Marcus's mediocrity to notice my success. Too convinced of your own superiority to see that the quiet one was building an empire. David suddenly spoke up. The Charity Foundation, the one funding tech education for underprivileged kids. That's yours too, isn't it? I nodded. Someone had to break the cycle of judgment and privilege. Might as well be the family disappointment. My phone buzzed again. Miss Bennett, your car is waiting, my driver texted. Don't leave like this, Mom pleaded. Stay. Talk to us. I have been talking for years, I replied. You just never listened. But don't worry, you'll be hearing a lot about me now. It's harder to ignore a billionaire than a secretary. As I walked out, I heard Marcus's phone ring. Probably his broker calling about his rapidly tanking investment portfolio. Tomorrow, when the news broke about his insider trading, he'd have bigger problems than his sister's success. I paused at my car, looking back at the house where I had grown up feeling invisible. Through the window, I could see them all still frozen around the dining table, their perfect Thanksgiving shattered by the truth they'd never bothered to see. My driver opened the door. Where to, Miss Bennett? I smiled. The office. It's time to finish what I started. because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reshaping an entire industry, about proving that success doesn't always look like they expect it to. And I was just getting started. The morning after Thanksgiving, my face was everywhere. Forbes, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, all running the story of the secretive tech billionaire who'd built an empire in silence. The quiet revolution, they called it, if they only knew the half of it. I sat in my real office, not the modest cubicle at Blackridge Capital, but the entire top floor of the Quantum Dynamics Tower downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city I'd quietly reshaped over the past 5 years. Your mother's called 6 times, my assistant Jessica informed me, setting down my morning coffee. Your father's trying to reach the board members, and Marcus, well, Marcus has bigger problems now. I pulled up the morning news on my tablet. SEC investigates major hedge fund for trading violations. The headline was diplomatic. The reality was anything but. The family lawyers are in the lobby, Jessica added. They're insisting on an immediate meeting. I took a sip of coffee. Let them wait. I have more important matters to handle. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Holy shit, cuz. Just saw the stock price. Why didn't you tell me? I smiled, remembering his face last night when he'd first seen the Fortune article. Of all my family members, he was the only one who'd ever shown genuine interest in technology. Maybe it was time to give him a real opportunity. Miss Bennett, Jessica interrupted my thoughts. The Singapore acquisition is ready for final approval. I nodded, turning to the wall of screens displaying real-time data from our AI systems worldwide. Another piece falling into place. While my family thought I was pushing papers, I'd been pushing boundaries. The intercom buzzed. Your brother's wife is here. She's quite insistent. Send her up, I said. Time to finish what last night started. Sophia burst into my office like a designer hurricane, all branded fury and expensive indignation. She stopped short, taking in the vast space, the view, the clear evidence of power she'd never believed I could possess. You destroyed him, she spat. Your own brother. No, I corrected calmly. Marcus destroyed himself. I just refused to cover it up. He's facing criminal charges. He's facing consequences, I said, standing. Something this family has always been remarkably good at avoiding. She threw an envelope on my desk. His career is over. Everything we built, everything you stole, I interrupted. Did you think I didn't know about the embezzlement? The offshore accounts? The clients you and Marcus defrauded? Her perfect composure cracked. How? I own the banks you used, the firms you thought would hide your transactions. When you're quietly building an empire, you learn to watch everything. What do you want? She whispered. I sat back down, straightening a stack of papers. Want? I don't want anything from you, Sophia. I have everything I need. The question is, what are you going to do now? What do you mean? Marcus is facing federal charges. Your assets are frozen. That prenup you thought would protect you. It won't. Not from this. She sank into a chair, designer dress crumpling. You thought of everything, haven't you? That's what the quiet ones do. We watch. We learn. We plan. My phone buzzed again. A news alert. The Peterson acquisition was public now. Our stock had jumped another 15%. There is one option, I said carefully, if you're interested in salvaging something from this mess. What? Tell the truth. All of it. Help the SEC unravel Marcus's schemes. In return, I'll ensure you have enough to start over. Somewhere far from here. You do that? After everything? I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it for the principal. Someone in this family should finally choose truth over appearance. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Where do I start? As Safia left my office 30 minutes later, clutching a stack of documents that would help federal prosecutors, Jessica appeared with an update. Your parents are still in the lobby, and the board of Harrison Tech, your father's company, is calling an emergency meeting. Apparently, their major investors are getting nervous. I smiled. Harrison Tech, the company that had cut off my college fund, that had bet against my success. Their stock was already falling as the market realized which side of the AI revolution they'd chosen. One more thing, Jessica added. David's here. Says he has an idea he wants to pitch. Send him up, I said. It's time this family learned what real mentorship looks like. My phone lit up with another text from my mother. Please, Olivia, we need to talk, as a family. I typed back a single response. I'm in my office, top floor of the building with my name on it. Come see what your quiet daughter built while you weren't watching. Because success isn't just about proving people wrong. It's about showing them exactly who you've been all along. And I was finally ready to be seen. The morning sun glinted off the Quantum Dynamics logo atop our building, visible from my parents' house across the city. Let them look up and remember, sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one you should have been listening to all along. The gentle clink of expensive crystal and quiet murmurs of judgment filled the air at La Maison, downtown's most exclusive French restaurant. My father's 60th birthday celebration was in full swing, though celebration felt like too warm a word for the Arctic atmosphere at our table. I'm Olivia Winters, though my family prefers to call me Liv. Their way of diminishing everything about me, right down to my name. At 29, I'm the youngest of 3 children and, according to family consensus, the only failure in a long line of Winter's success stories. I adjusted my simple black blazer, purchased from a department store, a fact my sister Catherine had already pointed out twice, and took another sip of water. Around me, my family was dressed in their finest, designer labels, luxury watches, and enough diamonds to finance a small country. Liv, darling. My mother Margaret's voice dripped with practiced concern. Are you sure you don't want wine? Your father's treating. She emphasized the word treating as if to remind me I couldn't afford the $200 bottles they were casually ordering. Water's fine, Mom. I'm working later. My brother James newly choked on his foie gras, still picking up shifts at that diner. What is it now? 3 years. 4, I corrected quietly. The Bluebird Cafe. A waitress, Catherine sighed, adjusting her Cartier bracelet. With a Stanford degree. Daddy, do you remember when she turned down that position at Goldman Sachs? Could have been junior VP by now. Dad looked up from his phone briefly. Let's not rehash old disappointments. It's supposed to be a celebration. I bit back a smile. If they only knew about the meeting I'd had that morning. About the papers sitting in my lawyer's office. About what was about to hit the evening news in exactly 47 minutes. Speaking of celebrations, Catherine continued. James just closed another major acquisition. Tell them, James. My brother straightened his Hermes tie. Winter's investment just acquired Peterson Tech. Small firm, but their AI division showed promise. Got it for a steal. They didn't even know what they had. I took another sip of water, remembering the frantic call I'd received from Peterson Tech's CEO last week. Are you sure about this, Miss Winters? Selling to your brother's firm seems. Trust me, Tom, I assured him. Everything's proceeding exactly as planned. Liv? Mom's voice snapped me back. Are you even listening? Your brother is talking about his success. Sorry, just thinking about my shift schedule. James laughed, that sharp, dismissive sound I'd grown to expect. Must be complicated, keeping track of all those coffee orders. How much does that pay now? Minimum wage plus tips? Something like that. You know, Catherine leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. My friend Sarah's company is hiring administrative assistants. Entry level, but it's a real job, in an office. Thank you, but I'm good where I am. Good. Dad finally put his phone down. Olivia, you live in a studio apartment in the worst part of town. Drive a car that's older than your career. Haven't taken a vacation in years. That's not good. That's settling. I checked my watch. 32 minutes. We're just worried about you, dear, Mom added. All that potential, just wasted. Even your old professors ask about you. Such a bright student, they say. What happened? What happened was 4 years of careful planning, of building something revolutionary while they were all too busy judging me to notice, of waiting for exactly the right moment to. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, my CFO. Stock transfer complete. Pressed release in 30. You ready for this? I texted back. Born ready. Family's all here. At least she's not asking for money, James offered, as if that was a consolation. Remember when she wanted us to invest in her tech startup idea? Catherine laughed. What was it called again? Winter something? Winter Tech Solutions, I supplied. The company name I'd abandoned 4 years ago when I realized my family would never take me seriously. The day I decided to build everything under a different name, a different identity, while maintaining my waitress cover. Well, thank goodness you didn't waste any family resources on that, Mom said. Though speaking of resources, James, tell them about the new house you're buying. James launched into a detailed description of his future mansion, complete with wine cellar and private tennis court. I let his words wash over me, watching the minutes tick down. 10 minutes. 5 minutes. 1 minute. The restaurant's background music suddenly cut out, replaced by the familiar jingle of the evening news. The massive screen above the bar, usually showing muted sports games, flickered to life with the volume up. Breaking news, the anchor announced. In what's being called the largest tech acquisition in the city's history, mysterious company Phoenix Digital has just revealed its ownership of 12 major tech firms, including Peterson Tech. James's fork clattered against his plate. What? The combined value of these acquisitions exceeds $4 billion, the anchor continued. And in a surprising revelation, Phoenix Digital's founder and CEO has been announced as. My family's faces turned toward the screen in perfect synchronization, just in time to see my corporate headshot appear. Olivia Winters, who reportedly built her tech empire in secret while working as a waitress at a local cafe. The silence that fell over our table was absolute. Mom's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Dad's phone slipped from his fingers. Catherine's perfect composure cracked like fine china. I dabbed my mouth with my napkin and stood slowly. I should go. My shift starts in an hour. Your shift? James choked out. Of course, I smiled. I own the cafe too, along with this restaurant, and the building it's in. Amazing what you can build while people underestimate you. I gathered my department store blazer and practical handbag. Dinner's on me. Order whatever you want. After all, I paused at the table's edge, savoring the moment. I can afford it. As I walked toward the door, I could hear the whispers starting. Could feel the ripple of recognition spreading through the restaurant as other diners connected the news announcement to the scene they just witnessed. My phone buzzed again. Marcus, stock's up 30% already. Ready for tomorrow's board meeting? I stepped out into the cool evening air, where my driver waited with a car that definitely wasn't my old Honda. Ready? I texted back. And Marcus? Make sure the boardroom has a good view of my brother's office building, the one I just bought. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's letting them discover exactly how wrong they've been all along. And this was just the beginning. The morning after my father's birthday dinner, I sat in my real office, not the small locker room at the Bluebird Cafe, but the entire top floor of the Phoenix Digital headquarters downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city I'd quietly been reshaping for the past 4 years. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since last night. 47 missed calls from James, 32 from Catherine, 65 from Dad, 51 from Mom, and exactly 248 text messages, each one more desperate than the last. I scrolled through them while sipping my morning coffee, the same cheap diner blend I'd grown to love during my waitress years. Old habits die hard. James, Olivia, we need to talk. This is insane. Mom, darling, please call us. We're worried. Catherine, Owen, do you live? Why didn't you tell me? I've been trying to reach Sarah about that assistant job. Dad, family emergency meeting. 9 a.m. The firm. Be there. I checked my watch. 8:57 a.m. They'd be gathering now in the Winters Investment Partners conference room, probably expecting me to come running at their summons like I used to. Instead, I turned to my laptop and opened the video conference app. At exactly 9:00 a.m., I sent them a link. My phone rang immediately. What is this? James's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. If you want to meet, we'll do it my way, I replied calmly. Click the link. One by one, their faces appeared on my screen. Dad at the head of their conference table, looking older than he had last night. Mom beside him, eyes red-rimmed like she hadn't slept. James pacing behind them, and Catherine perched on the edge of her seat, perfectly manicured nails drumming against the mahogany. Why aren't you here in person? Dad demanded. I leaned back in my chair, letting them see the city skyline behind me. I have 3 other meetings this morning. This seemed more efficient. Efficient? James exploded. You've been lying to us for years, playing some twisted game, pretending to be a waitress while building a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, I supplied. And I never lied. You just never asked the right questions. Olivia, Mom started, her voice wobbling. We just don't understand. Why did you let us think? Let us treat you like a failure. I finished for her, like someone beneath you? That's exactly why. I pulled up a document on my screen and shared it. This is a transcript from the family dinner 3 years ago when James announced his promotion to CEO. Would you like me to read your exact words, Dad? He paled slightly. That's not necessary. Thank God James stepped up. I read anyway. He understands what it takes to succeed in this business, unlike some people who just don't have the stomach for real power. Catherine shifted uncomfortably. That was a long time ago. 2 months ago, I continued, switching documents. At cousin Sarah's wedding, James told everyone I was finding myself through menial labor. Last Christmas, Catherine suggested I might qualify for low-income housing assistance. And just last night, you all sat there assuming I couldn't afford a meal at a restaurant I own. We were worried about you, Mom protested. No, I said quietly. You were comfortable with me failing. It made you feel better about yourselves. I pulled up another document. This one showing a list of acquisitions and their values. While you were pitying me, I was building something extraordinary. Not through family connections or inherited privilege, but through actual innovation and hard work. James snorted. Is that supposed to impress us? Anyone can get lucky with a few tech deals. 12 major acquisitions. I cut in. All prime tech firms. Total portfolio value as of this morning, $4.7 billion. And yes, I smiled slightly. That includes Peterson Tech, the company you thought you were acquiring. The color drained from James's face. That's impossible. We had a deal. You had a front row seat to a lesson in due diligence, I corrected. Tom Peterson was working for me the entire time. You were so busy looking down your nose at the waitress that you never bothered to check who really owned his company's patents. Dad leaned forward, and I recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same one he used to give potential business partners, calculating, measuring, looking for an angle. Olivia, he said, his voice taking on that smooth deal-maker tone. Clearly we've underestimated you. But now that we know what you've built, we can work together. Merge Phoenix Digital with Winter's investment. Combine our resources. No. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. What do you mean, no? Catherine asked, incredulous. I mean, no. I'm not interested in a merger or a partnership or whatever scheme you're already cooking up to get control of what I've built. We're family, Mom pleaded. Family? I laughed softly. Yesterday, I was the embarrassment you've had to explain at parties. Today, I'm family? I pulled up one final document. This is today's schedule for the Winters Investment Building. Your lease expires in 60 days. I won't be renewing it. You can't do that. James shot to his feet. That's been our headquarters for 30 years. Actually, I can, and I am. Consider it a reminder of what happens when you judge people based on appearances. I checked my watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the governor about making our city the next major tech hub. A real meeting in person. Olivia, wait. Dad started, but I was already reaching for the disconnect button. Oh, and James, I added, clean out your office by the end of the month. Some of us waitresses might need to mop the floors. I ended the call and sat back, letting out a long breath. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Winters, the governor's office is on line 1. I straightened my blazer. Armani now, though they'd never know, and smiled. Put him through. And Sarah? Send a gift basket to the staff at the Bluebird Cafe. They're about to get some very angry visitors. As I picked up the phone, I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. It was from my first day at the cafe. Apron tied, name tag crooked, serving coffee with a smile. The woman who trained me, Betty, had taught me more about people and business than any MBA program ever could. Sometimes, she told me, you have to look up from the bottom to see how high you can really build. I had built higher than my family ever imagined possible, and I was just getting started. The next 2 weeks unfolded exactly as I'd expected. My family, never ones to accept defeat gracefully, launched a campaign to either discredit me or force their way into my success. First came the rumors, whispers in country club lounges about how I must have acquired my fortune through questionable means. After all, how could a waitress build a billion-dollar empire legitimately? I was reviewing acquisition proposals in my office when my assistant Sarah burst through the door. "Your sister's here. She doesn't have an appointment." I glanced at the security feed. Catherine stood in the lobby, Hermel's bag clutched like a shield, looking uncomfortable among the young, casually dressed tech employees bustling through our open-concept workspace. "Send her up." When she walked in, her eyes widened at my office. No doubt she'd expected something less impressive. The space probably made her firm's executive suite look like a storage closet. "Nice view," she said, trying for casual as she sat across from me. "Though the furniture's a bit minimal." I looked at my deliberately simple desk, chosen because it matched the one Betty used at the Bluebird Cafe. "What do you want, Catherine?" She pulled out a folder. "I've been going through some old family documents. Did you know that technically, as the oldest, I have a claim to any business using the Winters name?" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Phoenix Digital has no connection to Winters Investment. I made sure of that." Her face fell. "But surely we could work something out. James is struggling. Dad too. That building was their legacy." "No," I corrected. "That building was their comfort zone. They're not angry about losing an office. They're angry about losing control." "They sent me to offer you a deal," she admitted finally. "Of course they did. Let me guess. They'll stop spreading rumors about my business practices if I lease them back their office space." Her silence was answer enough. I turned back to face her. "Here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to leave here and tell them that their threats are as ineffective as their business strategy. Then you're going to watch as I acquire the Wilson portfolio next week. Yes, the same one James has been chasing for 2 years." "How did you know about Wilson?" I smiled. "Because I own the building where your firm holds its confidential board meetings. And unlike you, I actually talk to the maintenance staff. They hear everything." Just then my phone buzzed. A text from security. "James Winters attempting to access server room." "Right on schedule," I murmured. "Excuse me, Catherine. I have to deal with something. Our brother just broke into my building's restricted area, probably looking for evidence of wrongdoing." Her face paled. "How did you? Cameras everywhere. Would you like to join me? It should be enlightening." We took my private elevator down. When the doors opened, we found James being detained by 2 security guards, both former Bluebird Cafe employees I'd promoted. "Looking for something?" I asked calmly. James struggled against the guards. "You must have dirt hidden somewhere. Nobody builds this much this fast without." "Without what?" "Hard work, understanding how technology actually works, treating people with respect regardless of their position." I nodded to the guards. "These men used to serve coffee with me. Now they run my building security because I saw their potential instead of looking down on them." "Olivia," Catherine interrupted. "You've made your point. What do you want from us?" "Want?" I laughed softly. "I don't want anything from you. That's what none of you understand. I built this company by choice, not necessity. I worked at the cafe by choice, not failure." I turned to the guards. "Please escort my brother out. And James, the next time you try to break in, I'll press charges, family or not." That evening, I received an email from Dad. "Olivia, Your mother and I have been doing some reflection. Perhaps we were wrong about your choices. The firm is struggling without the building, and your recent acquisitions have shown us that maybe we don't understand the market as well as we thought. I'd like to have dinner. Just us. No business talk, no deals, just a father trying to understand his daughter. Dad, I stared at the message for a long time, remembering all the dinners where they'd looked through me. All the times they dismissed my ideas. All the moments they chose prestige over understanding. Finally, I replied, Dad, dinner is fine, but not at La Maison. Meet me at the Bluebird Cafe. It's where the real work happens, where real people build real things. If you want to understand me, start by understanding them. Come alone. No James, no Catherine, no hidden agendas. Olivia. The next evening, I sat in my usual booth at the Bluebird, nursing a cup of coffee. The door chimed, and Dad walked in, looking completely out of place in his bespoke suit. The regular customers, workers ending their shifts, students with laptops, families on budgets, looked up briefly before returning to their meals. Dad slid into the booth, clearly uncomfortable. Interesting choice of venue. This is where I learned my most valuable lessons about business, I said. Not at Stanford, not at the firm. Here, listening to people who actually build things. He picked up the laminated menu, probably the first non-fine dining menu he touched in decades. I don't understand why you did it this way. Why not just tell us? Would you have listened? Or would you have tried to control it, shape it into your version of success? He was quiet for a long moment. We thought we were protecting you. No, I said firmly. You thought you were protecting your image of what success should look like. You never asked what I wanted to build. Betty came over, still working the evening shift by choice, though she now owned shares in both the cafe and Phoenix Digital. The usual, Olivia? She asked with a warm smile. Thanks, Betty. How's Michael doing at MIT? Top of his class, she beamed. Those scholarships you arranged really helped. After she left, Dad stared at me. You know their names, their stories. I know everyone's names, their stories, their potential. That's why I succeeded where you and James failed. You see buildings as assets. I see them as communities. Dad looked around the cafe with new eyes, finally seeing what I'd seen years ago. Teach me, he said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. Teach you what? Not about business, not about real estate. Teach me how to see what you see. For the first time in years, I heard genuine humility in his voice. Okay, I said slowly. But we start from the ground up, literally. Tomorrow morning, 5:00 a.m. Meet me at the Bluebird. Wear comfortable shoes. What are we doing at 5:00 a.m.? I smiled. Making coffee, serving people. Learning that success isn't just about what you own. It's about what you build and who you build it with. As we finished our coffee, I noticed Betty bringing over a piece of pie, my usual end-of-shift order. Add his to my tab, Dad said quickly, reaching for his wallet. No need, Betty replied. Olivia owns the place, has for 3 years. Never changed a thing except to make sure we all had health insurance and a stake in the business. Dad set down his fork, finally understanding. I hadn't just built buildings. I'd built relationships, trust, and communities. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for not seeing you. Really seeing you. I know, I replied. That's why tomorrow we start with open eyes. As we left the cafe, Dad looked up at the skyline, my skyline. You know, he said thoughtfully, I never really looked up from my office until now. I smiled. Sometimes you have to start at the bottom to truly understand the view from the top. The next morning, when Dad arrived at the Bluebird at 5:00 a.m., he found me already there in my old apron, helping Betty open for the day. The look of surprise on his face was priceless, but the lesson was clear. True power isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about understanding every level of what you build, respecting everyone who helps build it, and never forgetting where you started. Even now, years later, I still keep my old Bluebird Cafe apron hanging in my office, not as a reminder of where I came from, but as a reminder of who I really am. Someone who built success from the ground up. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's becoming so undeniably right that they have no choice but to see it for themselves. And as I watched my father tie on an apron for the first time in his life, I knew that some lessons are best learned over a cup of coffee and a slice of humble pie. I stood at the service entrance of Harrison Manor, my hand hovering over the brass doorknob I'd turned thousands of times before. The kitchen door, the proper entrance for the help, as my stepmother Caroline never failed to remind me. 10 years of being forced to use this entrance, even after my father's death, made me a legal heir. Snow fell softly around me, catching in my designer coat that cost more than Caroline's monthly spa budget. Not that she'd recognize it. The label was too exclusive for her nouveau-rich tastes. My phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Peters, my real estate attorney. Papers ready, waiting for your signal. I smiled, tucking the phone back into my purse. Inside, I could hear the familiar sounds of the annual Harrison Christmas dinner. Crystal clinking, forced laughter, the constant competition of who had acquired what, who had traveled where. Miss Alexandra? Maria, our old housekeeper, opened the door. Her eyes brightened seeing me, then filled with concern. Oh, honey, you shouldn't be using this entrance anymore. The help? I finished with a wink. Just playing my part one last time, Maria. Trust me. She hugged me quickly, whispering, They're awful today. Miss Caroline has been bragging about renovating your mother's rose garden into a tennis court. My mother's roses? The last piece of her left in this house, besides me. Of course, Caroline would choose today to announce their destruction. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with real cooking. Maria's domain, not the catered nonsense Caroline served in the dining room. Other household staff moved about, preparing dishes while shooting me sympathetic glances. They knew who really took care of them after Father died, who ensured their pensions remained intact when Caroline tried to slash them. Alexandra. Caroline's shrill voice carried from the dining room. If you're skulking in the kitchen again, do make yourself useful and bring more wine. Stifled laughter followed her command. My step-siblings, no doubt, Thomas and Victoria, who'd never worked a day in their lives, but loved to mock my servant tendencies. I picked up an expensive bottle of Bordeaux, one I'd actually purchased, though Caroline had undoubtedly taken credit for it. Time to serve the Last Supper, I murmured to Maria, who covered her knowing smile. The dining room was a monument to Caroline's tacky idea of luxury, everything gold-plated and ostentatious. Nothing like the elegant simplicity my mother had cultivated. My step-siblings lounged in their usual spots near the head of the table, while various social climbing friends filled the other seats. Oh good, the wine girl arrives, Thomas smirked. At 35, he still lived off his monthly allowance, spending his days networking at country clubs. Victoria adjusted her obviously new diamond necklace so it caught the light. Really, Alexandra, if you love serving so much, we should put you on staff officially. Though we have to discuss a proper uniform. I poured the wine silently, years of practice keeping my hands steady despite their jabs. Caroline sat at the head of the table, my father's place, then my mother's, now claimed by a woman who saw the house as nothing but a status symbol. Since you insist on joining us for Christmas, Caroline gestured to a small table near the kitchen door. You can sit there. We wouldn't want to make the real guests uncomfortable. More snickers. The real guests, social climbers, and fair weather friends who'd disappear the moment the money ran dry. Which, if they'd bothered to check the estate accounts, was happening faster than they realized. I took my seat at the servants' table, carefully arranging my simple black dress. The channel label hidden inside would have paid for everyone's meal tonight. Now then, Caroline raised her glass. I have an exciting announcement. As you know, this estate has been in need of modernization. So I've decided to begin extensive renovations in the new year, starting with that dreadful rose garden. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. One text would set everything in motion. The tennis court will be regulation size, she continued, and the pool house will be converted into a spa retreat. Of course, some staff quarters might need to be downsized. Maria, bringing in another dish, barely concealed her distress. Those quarters were her home for 30 years. Oh, and Alexandra. Caroline turned her cold smile to me. Since you love the kitchen so much, you should know we're converting the service wing into a wine cellar. You'll need to find new accommodation by February. That was it, the final twist of the knife. I pulled out my phone, keeping it visible on the small table. Actually, Caroline, I said clearly, we need to discuss some changes to those renovation plans. She laughed. Dear girl, I don't discuss property decisions with the help. My phone rang right on schedule. I put it on speaker. Miss Harrison? Mr. Peters' voice filled the room. The papers are signed and registered. Congratulations. You now own the entire estate, including all adjacent properties and holdings. The crystal glass slipped from Caroline's hand, shattering against the imported tablecloth. What did he say? Victoria whispered. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress. I believe he said I own everything, including the chair you're sitting in, Caroline, and I think it's time for some renovations of my own. The dining room froze in perfect tableau. Caroline's face locked in disbelief, Victoria clutching her fake diamonds, and Thomas half rising from his chair with his mouth hanging open. This is impossible, Caroline finally sputtered. The estate is in my name. Your father left. Left everything in trust, I interrupted smoothly. A trust that matured last month on my 30th birthday. But you knew that, didn't you? That's why you've been rushing to spend as much as possible before losing control. I walked slowly around the table, touching the back of each chair. What you didn't know was that I spent the last 5 years buying every property surrounding the estate. The lands you thought were owned by various holding companies. All mine. But you work in that little office downtown, Victoria protested weakly. I smiled. That little office is the headquarters of Harrison Global Investments. We manage over $12 billion in assets. Though I'm not surprised you never bothered to check, too busy spending money to wonder where it came from. Mr. Peters cleared his throat over the speakerphone. Should I proceed with the other arrangements, Ms. Harrison? Yes, please. Send in the security team. On cue, Professionally dressed security personnel entered the dining room. Maria appeared in the doorway, beaming as she watched the scene unfold. "This is outrageous." Caroline stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'll call the police." "About what?" I asked calmly. "Your illegal accessing of trust funds. The forged documents you used to claim ownership of my mother's personal items. Or perhaps the offshore accounts where you've been hiding estate money." She went pale. "How did you?" "I learned from you, Caroline. I watched everything. Every scheme, every manipulation, every cruel little power play. I just watched from the kitchen, where you thought I belonged." Thomas jumped up. "You can't just throw us out. We live here." "Actually, I can. You see, I had my lawyers review every document you've signed in the past decade. Apparently, living rent-free in a trust property requires proper documentation. Documentation you never filed." Victoria burst into tears, smearing her expensive mascara. "But where will we go?" "Don't worry," I said, taking my father's seat at the head of the table. "I'm not completely heartless. You have until New Year's to find new accommodation. More generous than the 2 weeks' notice you gave Mrs. Reynolds when you kicked her out of the gardener's cottage to build your yoga studio." The security team began quietly escorting the dinner guests out. Caroline's social circle couldn't leave fast enough. Their previous sycophantic smiles replaced with barely concealed glee at her downfall. "Maria," I called out, "please show Mr. Peters' team which items belong to the estate. They'll be cataloging everything tonight." "With pleasure, Miss Alexandra," Maria replied, already directing staff to unlock various rooms. Caroline made one last attempt. "Your father would be ashamed of you, treating family this way." The room went silent. I stood slowly, letting my simple black dress catch the light just right to reveal its true quality. "Family," I said softly. "Let's talk about family, Caroline. When father was dying, who sat with him every night? When the estate needed managing, who learned every aspect of the business while you were redecorating? Who kept the staff employed when you wanted to fire everyone to save money for your spa trips?" I pulled out a small key, the key to my mother's private study, which Caroline had never managed to open. "I am my father's daughter, and more importantly, I am my mother's daughter. This estate isn't just property to me, it's a legacy. One you never understood." My phone buzzed again. Another message from Mr. Peters. "Trust transfer complete. All accounts now under your control. Check your credit cards," I suggested to my step-siblings. "I think you'll find they've been deactivated. Don't worry about the charges you made this morning. Consider them my Christmas gifts to you." Victoria crumpled into her chair. Thomas started frantically tapping on his phone, presumably discovering his accounts were frozen. "You can't do this," Caroline whispered, but her voice had lost its authority. "I already have." I nodded to the security team. "Please escort them to their rooms. They can pack personal belongings only, authenticated personal belongings." As they were led away, I heard Victoria wail, "But where will we have Christmas dinner next year?" I looked around the dining room, at my mother's portrait that Caroline had relegated to a dark corner, at the tacky decorations that would soon be replaced, at the kitchen door that would never again be used to segregate family from help. "I'm sure there's a nice restaurant that would be happy to serve you," I called after them. "Just make sure you can afford the bill." As the grandfather clock struck midnight, I sat in my mother's study, finally alone. The security team had finished their initial inventory. Maria had overseen the removal of Caroline's more garish decorations, and my step-family had been confined to their rooms under supervision while they packed. My phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. "Please, we can work something out. That necklace you always loved. It's yours." I smiled, remembering the fake diamonds she'd been so proud of. "You mean the cubic zirconia?" I texted back. "Keep it. Consider it a memento." The study remained exactly as my mother had left it, protected by a lock system Caroline never managed to crack. Every book, every photograph, every small treasure exactly where it should be, including the item I'd come to find. The bottom drawer of Mother's desk contained a simple wooden box. Inside was a letter, dated just before her death, and a single key. "My dearest Alexandra," the letter began, "if you're reading this, you've finally taken back what's yours. The key opens the vault in the wine cellar. The real vault, not the decoy Caroline thinks she found. Everything I couldn't trust to lawyers is there. Use it wisely." A knock at the study door interrupted my reading. "Miss Alexandra?" Maria called softly. "They're asking to speak with you, all three of them." I tucked the letter away. "In the main hall, please. It's time they learned the difference between living in a house and being part of its legacy." The main hall, with its sweeping staircase and generations of Harrison family portraits, had always been Caroline's favorite spot for making grand pronouncements. Now she stood there like a deflated version of herself, designer outfit wrinkled, makeup smeared. "Alexandra," she began, forcing a maternal tone she'd never actually used before, "surely we can discuss this reasonably. We're still family." "Stop." I held up my hand. "You lost the right to that word the day you made me eat Christmas dinner in the kitchen after my father's funeral. I was 16, grieving, and you were already redecorating his study." Thomas stepped forward. "Look, we know we've been difficult, but this house, I cut in, was built by my great-grandfather. Every brick, every beam, every rose in that garden you wanted to destroy has a story. Stories you never bothered to learn because you were too busy treating it like a trophy." Victoria dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, one she'd stolen from my mother's collection. "What do you want? Money? Position? Name it?" I laughed softly. "I have more money than you can imagine. As for position," I gestured to the security team, "I'd say my position is quite clear." "Then why?" Caroline demanded. "Why go through all this deception? Why work in that office, live in that apartment, if you were so wealthy?" "Because," I said, climbing the first few steps of the grand staircase to look down at them, "I wanted to see who you really were, without the fake smiles and forced politeness you showed when you thought I had power. I wanted to know if any of you had a shred of real family feeling left." The silence that followed was damning. "Your cars will be here in 10 minutes, I continued. "The Four Seasons has rooms reserved for you for 1 week. After that, you're on your own." "But our clothes? Our jewelry?" Victoria started. "Everything purchased with estate money stays here. Your trust fund payments have been discontinued, effective immediately. Mr. Peters has prepared detailed documentation of fund misuse over the past decade, should you wish to contest this legally." Caroline's face hardened. "Your father would be proud," I finished. "He left letters too, Caroline, in that vault you'd never found. He knew exactly who you were. He just hoped you'd prove him wrong." The front doors opened, revealing 3 black cars waiting in the circular drive. Snow was falling again, covering the garden where, come spring, my mother's roses would bloom again. "Miss Alexandra?" Maria appeared with a stack of papers. The initial inventory is complete. We found some concerning items in Miss Victoria's safe. My personal safe? Victoria shrieked. You had no right. Actually, I held up a document. According to the trust agreement, everything in this house belongs to the estate, including some rather interesting jewelry that matches the description of pieces reported stolen from the governor's wife last spring. Thomas went pale. Victoria stopped crying. Caroline gripped the banister for support. Don't worry, I said quietly. I'm not pressing charges. Consider it your Christmas gift, along with the chance to leave here with some dignity intact. Though I suggest you all find good lawyers. The security team began escorting them out. At the door, Caroline turned back one last time. You planned this for years, didn't you? Watched us, studied us, just waiting for the right moment? I thought of all the holidays spent in the kitchen, listening to their laughter. All the nights spent learning the business while they partied. All the quiet moments in this study, reading my mother's letters, preparing for this day. No, Caroline, you planned this. Every time you chose cruelty over kindness. Every time you put status above family. Every time you looked at me and saw someone to dominate instead of someone to love. I just made sure you reaped what you sowed. The doors closed behind them with a final, heavy thud. Through the windows, I watched the cars disappear down the snow-covered drive. Maria, I called out, gather the staff in the kitchen, please. All of them. It's time for Christmas dinner. The real Christmas dinner. As I walked toward the kitchen, this time through the main hall, head held high, I smiled at my mother's portrait. Merry Christmas, Mom, I whispered. The roses are safe now. Everything is.
My name is Victoria Chin, and at 32, I never imagined Christmas dinner would become the most satisfying moment of my life. Sitting at my in-laws' mahogany dining table, surrounded by crystal glasses and family portraits that didn't include me, I watched my husband Marcus nervously adjust his tie. He knew what was coming. We both did. The annual tradition of his mother, Patricia Blackwood, finding new ways to remind me that I didn't belong in their world of old money and older prejudices. But this Christmas would be different. This Christmas the truth would finally come out. Before I tell you exactly how their perfectly orchestrated family dinner turned into the most uncomfortable meal of their privileged lives, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever been underestimated because of where you come from or what you look like, this story is for you. Hit that like button because trust me, the revenge in this story is sweeter than Patricia's famous Christmas pudding. I met Marcus 3 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. I was there representing the venture capital firm where I worked as a senior analyst, and he was presenting his startup's latest product. What caught my attention wasn't his pitch, though it was solid, but the way he actually listened when I asked technical questions, unlike most entrepreneurs who assumed I was someone's assistant. You really know your stuff, he said afterward, genuine surprise in his voice. I have an MBA from Wharton and 7 years in venture capital, I replied, handing him my business card. Victoria Chin and Associates. His eyes widened as he read the card. Chin and Associates wasn't just any firm. We managed over $2 billion in assets and had a reputation for finding the next big thing before anyone else noticed. What he didn't know then, and what his family still didn't know now, was that I wasn't just an employee. I was the Chin and Associates. Our courtship was refreshingly normal. Marcus was kind, intelligent, and driven. Qualities I valued far more than his family's wealth, though I had plenty of my own. He told me about his family gradually, painting them as traditional but loving. His father, Robert, was a retired investment banker. His mother, Patricia, dedicated her life to charity work and maintaining the family's social standing. His sister, Caroline, worked in art curation and lived off her trust fund. They can be a bit formal, Marcus warned me before our first meeting. Old East Coast money comes with certain expectations. I understood. I'd grown up in San Francisco's Chinatown, where my parents ran a small import business. Through scholarships, hard work, and strategic investments, I'd built something they couldn't comprehend. Wealth that didn't come with a pedigree or a family crest. The first dinner at the Blackwood estate was exactly what I expected. The Georgian mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, screamed old money from its marble foyer to its oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Patricia greeted me with the kind of smile society matrons perfect in finishing school. Warm on the surface, calculating underneath. "Victoria, how lovely," she said, air-kissing near my cheek. "Marcus tells us you work in finance?" The slight pause before finance was deliberate, as if my career was a hobby I'd eventually outgrow once I secured my real goal, marriage into their family. During dinner, the questions came disguised as polite conversation. Where did I go to school? Wharton, but they somehow missed that detail. What did my parents do? Import business, which they interpreted as shop owners. How did I afford my apartment in the financial district? Investment portfolio, though they assumed Marcus was helping with rent. Caroline, blonde and sharp-tongued like her mother, was more direct. "It must be nice dating someone so established," she said, swirling her wine. "Takes the pressure off, doesn't it?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Caroline." "What?" "I'm just saying it's practical. Victoria's obviously very smart." The backhanded compliment hung in the air like expensive perfume, cloying and impossible to ignore. But I smiled and complimented Caroline's vintage Cartier bracelet, watching her preen at the recognition of her good taste. That night, Marcus apologized profusely. "They'll warm up to you," he promised. "They just need time." 2 years later, when Marcus proposed with his grandmother's engagement ring, a stunning Art Deco piece worth more than most people's cars, I realized they had no intention of warming up to me. The ring came with a lecture from Patricia about family traditions and maintaining certain standards. The wedding planning was a masterclass in subtle exclusion, with Patricia making decisions and then informing me of them later. "We've booked the club for the reception," she announced during one planning session. "It's where all the Blackwood weddings have been held." "I thought we discussed the botanical gardens," I said calmly. "Oh dear, that's far too public. The club is much more appropriate for our family." "Our family. Never your wedding, or Victoria and Marcus's celebration. Always their family, their traditions, their standards." The wedding was beautiful and cold, like a museum exhibit on how proper families celebrate. My parents, proud and slightly overwhelmed, were seated at a back table with distant cousins and college friends. Patricia's friends occupied the prime real estate near the head table, where they could properly observe and judge the proceedings. During the reception, I overheard Patricia explaining my background to the garden club president. "She's quite accomplished, actually. Works at some investment firm. Not quite our world, but Marcus is happy." Not quite our world. The phrase that would define the next year of my marriage. After the wedding, the subtle campaign to remind me of my place intensified. Family gatherings included casual mentions of ex-girlfriends who were more suitable. Charity events featured introductions that somehow never mentioned my actual job title. Holiday gifts were carefully chosen to reflect what they thought I could afford to reciprocate. Nice enough to seem generous, expensive enough to make me feel inadequate. Marcus, caught between his family and his wife, tried to maintain peace by minimizing the conflicts. "You know how my mother is," became his standard response to my frustrations. "She means well." But I wasn't naive. I recognized a long-term strategy when I saw one. They were betting that eventually the constant pressure would either break me or break us. What they didn't understand was that I'd been underestimated my entire life, and I'd turned it into a competitive advantage. The breaking point came last Christmas, exactly 1 year after our wedding. We were staying at the family estate for the holidays, a tradition I'd learned was non-negotiable. The house was decorated like a magazine spread, garland on every banister, wreaths on every door, and a 12-foot tree in the living room that required a ladder to reach the top. Christmas Eve dinner was an elaborate affair with Patricia's signature prime rib, multiple wine courses, and enough crystal to stock a small store. The guest list included family friends, business associates, and several unmarried daughters of Patricia's contemporaries. A not-so-subtle reminder that Marcus had other options. Caroline had brought her newest boyfriend, a hedge fund manager named Preston who spoke in financial jargon and name-dropped his Harvard connections every few minutes. The conversation inevitably turned to business and investments, with Robert holding court about his glory days on Wall Street. The problem with today's market, Robert pontificated, is that everyone thinks they're an investor. Young people especially, they see one success story and think they know something about wealth management. Preston nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. Real wealth requires experience, connections, generational knowledge. It's not something you can just learn. I felt Marcus tense beside me, recognizing the subtle dig. Caroline smirked from across the table, while Patricia maintained her serene hostess expression. Of course, some people are natural investors, Preston continued, warming to his theme. Marcus, for instance, has excellent instincts. That trust fund your grandmother set up is performing beautifully. Marcus nearly choked on his wine. Preston. What? It's not a secret. Family money, properly managed, is the foundation of real security. Not like these new money types who get lucky with tech stocks and think they're financial geniuses. The room fell silent except for the crackling fireplace. Everyone knew exactly who Preston was referring to, and it wasn't subtle. I could feel the expectation in the air. Would I defend myself, make a scene, prove their point about my unsuitability? Instead, I smiled and took a sip of my wine. Patricia, emboldened by my silence, decided to twist the knife. Well, not everyone can be born into the right circumstances, she said with false sympathy. We all work with what we have. Caroline laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. Some people are just more practical about their choices. Meaning? Marcus asked, his voice warning. Oh, come on, Caroline waved her hand dismissively. Everyone knows why people marry into established families. It's not exactly a secret. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Gold digger. The word they'd all been thinking for 3 years but never quite said aloud. Patricia set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. Caroline has a point. Some people marry for love, others for opportunity. There's no shame in being practical. Mother, Marcus started, but she held up a perfectly manicured hand. Let me finish, dear. Victoria is obviously intelligent. She saw an opportunity and took it. That's admirable in its way. But let's not pretend this marriage is about anything other than financial security. The room was completely silent now. Even the fire seemed to have stopped crackling. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Preston looked like he was watching a tennis match, his head swiveling between participants. She's just a gold digger, Patricia announced, her voice carrying the finality of a judge's verdict. Marrying for money. We all know it, even if we're too polite to say it. I smiled and said, actually, I'm the one who set up his trust fund. The champagne glasses stopped clinking. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to have frozen in time. I'm sorry. Patricia's composure cracked just slightly. I reached for my purse, a vintage Hermes that Patricia had once commented was a good replica, and pulled out a leather portfolio. I said, I'm the one who set up Marcus's trust fund. Would you like to see the paperwork? Marcus stared at me with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. He'd never asked detailed questions about his trust fund, assuming it was another family arrangement he didn't need to understand. I opened the portfolio and laid out the documents on Patricia's pristine white tablecloth. Trust agreements, investment statements, and incorporation papers, all bearing the seal of Chin and Associates and my signature as the managing partner. The Blackwood Family Trust, I read aloud, established January 15, 2019, with an initial investment of $5.2 million, currently valued at $8.7 million thanks to strategic investments in emerging technologies and cryptocurrency. Robert leaned forward, his face pale. That's impossible. Our family attorney referred you to Chin and Associates when you needed someone to restructure Marcus's inheritance for tax purposes, I continued. I handled the entire transaction personally, though I worked under my associate's name to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest once Marcus and I started dating. I pulled out another set of documents. These are the quarterly reports I've been sending to your family attorney. Performance summaries, investment strategies, projected growth. I've been managing your son's money for 4 years and quite successfully, I might add. Caroline's mouth opened and closed like a fish. But, you work for someone else. I work for myself. Chin and Associates is my firm. I founded it 8 years ago with $500,000 of my own money I made day trading while I was getting my MBA. I smiled at her shocked expression. That replica Hermes bag you mentioned? I bought it with my first million. Preston, ever the hedge fund manager, was the first to recover. Wait, you're saying you manage the Blackwood Trust? The one that's been outperforming the S&P by 12% annually. 14% actually, if you count the cryptocurrency positions I established in 2020. The silence stretched on. I could hear Patricia's careful breathing, Robert's nervous finger tapping, and somewhere in the distance, the kitchen staff cleaning up from dinner service. Marcus found his voice first. Victoria, why didn't you tell me? I tried to keep our personal and professional lives separate. Your family hired me before we met, and I thought it might be awkward if you knew I was managing your money while we were dating. But after we got married, your family made it very clear that they thought I was only interested in your money. It seemed like telling them I was already managing it might complicate things. Patricia finally managed to speak. You can't be serious. I pulled out my phone and showed her the Chin and Associates website, with my photo prominently displayed as founder and CEO. Then I scrolled to our client testimonials, where the Blackwood family attorney had written a glowing review of our innovative strategies and exceptional returns. Your attorney has been recommending us to his other clients for 3 years, I said. We currently manage over $2 billion in assets for families just like yours. The truth was sinking in, and I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. All this time they'd been treating me like some opportunistic outsider while I was quietly making them money. A lot of money. Robert cleared his throat. The Christmas bonus, the one that paid for Caroline's new car, came from the cryptocurrency profits I generated last quarter, I confirmed. I've been reinvesting the gains to diversify the portfolio, but your attorney suggested distributing some of the profits for tax purposes. Caroline, who had been silent since the revelation began, finally found her voice. So when you complimented my Cartier bracelet at that first dinner, I was being polite. I own the same one in 3 different metals. Preston, apparently unable to help himself, blurted out, "What's your net worth?" Marcus shot him a look, but I answered anyway. Personal assets or firm assets? Personal. Around $47 million, give or take a few million depending on market fluctuations. The number hung in the air like a challenge. To put it in perspective, the Blackwood family's total wealth, including their house, investments, and Marcus's trust fund, was approximately $15 million. I wasn't just rich. I was significantly richer than they were. Patricia's wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. But, your parents, the import business, is worth about $12 million now. I helped them expand into online retail 5 years ago. They were nervous about the investment, but I guaranteed the loan personally. I smiled at the memory. They're actually thinking about retiring to that house they bought in Napa. The one with the view of the valley. The evening that had started with subtle insults about my background had turned into a financial disclosure that reframed every interaction we'd ever had. Every time they talked down to me, every assumption about my motives, every carefully worded insult, all of it had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I brought to their family. Marcus was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Victoria, I had no idea. I know. And I should have told you sooner. But honestly, I looked around the table at their shocked faces. I was curious to see how long this would go on. How long your family would keep treating me like some kind of opportunist while I was quietly making them wealthier than they'd ever been. Robert found his voice. The advisory fees. How much have we been paying you? 2% annually on managed assets. Standard rate for high net worth clients. I pulled out my calculator app. On an $8.7 million portfolio, that's about $174,000 per year. But considering I've grown your initial investment by 67% in 4 years, I'd say you've gotten excellent value. The math was brutal and undeniable. Not only had they been wrong about my motivations, but they'd been paying me handsomely for the privilege of being wrong. Caroline, who had built her entire identity around having more than others, looked like she was going to be sick. So when you said you couldn't afford the charity gala table last year, I said I hadn't budgeted for it. There's a difference. I prefer to research charities thoroughly before making large donations. Unlike some people, I don't give money just to be seen giving money. It was a direct hit and Caroline flinched. Her charity work was entirely performative, all about the social aspects and none about the actual causes. Patricia, meanwhile, was going through what looked like all 5 stages of grief simultaneously. But the wedding, you let us pay for everything. You insisted on paying for everything. Every time I offered to contribute, you said it was family tradition for the bride's family to handle the flowers and the groom's family to handle the venue. I wrote a check for $50,000 to cover my parents' portion and offered to pay for the honeymoon. You declined. Marcus looked confused. I thought your parents paid for the flowers. I reimbursed them that night. They were nervous about the expense, but I didn't want to embarrass them by insisting on paying directly. The true scope of the misunderstanding was becoming clear. While they'd been plotting to make me feel inferior, I'd been quietly managing their money and protecting my parents' dignity. Every slight, every subtle insult, every assumption had been not just wrong but spectacularly wrong. Preston, still fixated on the financial implications, leaned forward. What about the prenup? Did you sign one? The question was incredibly rude, but it cut to the heart of what everyone was thinking. Patricia perked up slightly. Surely they'd protected themselves with legal documentation. Marcus answered before I could. We didn't sign a prenup. Victoria said she didn't need one. Because I didn't, I added. My assets are in a family trust that predates our marriage. Marcus couldn't touch them even if he wanted to. I paused for effect. But if we divorced, he'd lose access to his trust fund management. I suppose he'd have to find another investment advisor. The implication was clear. I held all the cards and I always had. Robert, ever the practical businessman, was the first to grasp the full situation. So you're saying, this entire time, you've been managing your family's money while your family questioned my motives for marrying your son? Yes. I closed the portfolio and slipped it back into my purse. It's been an interesting 3 years. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shock. This was the silence of people recalculating everything they thought they knew, realizing that every assumption had been not just wrong but embarrassingly wrong. Marcus reached for my hand under the table. I'm so sorry, Victoria. I should have defended you more. I should have told them. Told them what? You didn't know either. I squeezed his hand. But you never treated me like they did. You never questioned my motives or made me feel like I didn't belong. It was true. Marcus had his flaws, but he'd never been calculating or cruel like his family. He'd simply been raised in a world where certain assumptions went unquestioned. Patricia was still processing, her perfect hostess facade cracking visibly. All those times when you said I wasn't quite your world. When you suggested I was marrying for money. When you seated my parents at the back of the reception. I kept my voice level, professional. I remember. Caroline buried her face in her hands. Oh God, the Hermes comment. Among others. The grandfather clock chimed 10 times, marking the official end of what was supposed to be a pleasant family Christmas Eve dinner. Instead, it had become a reckoning 3 years in the making. Preston, apparently incapable of reading the room, asked, So what happens now? Do you fire them as clients? It was Marcus who answered, his voice firm. That's enough, Preston. This is a family matter. But I was curious about the same thing. What did happen now? I'd spent 3 years being quietly insulted while professionally managing their money. The situation was unprecedented in my experience. I don't fire clients for personal reasons, I said finally. Your portfolio is performing well and I have a fiduciary responsibility to maintain that performance regardless of other circumstances. Robert nodded slowly. That's very professional of you. I am a professional. I always have been. The evening concluded with the kind of awkward politeness that follows a social disaster. Gifts were exchanged with forced smiles and minimal conversation. Patricia's famous Christmas pudding sat largely untouched as everyone found reasons to retire early. In our bedroom that night, Marcus sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. I feel like I don't know anything anymore. I sat beside him, still wearing the pearl necklace my parents had given me for Christmas. Real pearls, cultured in Japan, worth more than Caroline's car. What do you want to know? Everything. How long have you been Why didn't you tell me? So I told him. About starting with $500,000 in savings and turning it into millions through careful investments and strategic risks. About building a client base through referrals and reputation rather than family connections. About the satisfaction of being recognized for expertise rather than background. When your family hired me, I was already successful. When we met, I was already wealthy. When we married, I was already established in ways they never bothered to discover. Marcus was quiet for a long time. I failed you, he said finally. I let them treat you that way for 3 years. You couldn't defend against accusations you didn't know were being made. But I could see how they treated you. I knew it was wrong and I chose peace over protection. It was the most honest thing he'd said in months and I respected him for it. What would you have done differently? I would have told them about your success from the beginning. I would have corrected their assumptions instead of letting them fester. I would have made it clear that you didn't need our money. You were already making it. And now. He really looked at me for the first time in our marriage. Now I understand why you never seemed intimidated by them. You were never the one at a disadvantage. The next morning, Christmas Day, began with an awkward family breakfast. Patricia had clearly been up all night, probably researching Chin and Associates and confirming that everything I'd told them was true. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced by nervous energy and overcompensation. Victoria, dear, would you like more coffee? She asked for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. I'm fine, thank you. Robert attempted normal conversation about the weather and local news, but everyone was thinking about the elephant in the room. Caroline remained mostly silent, picking at her eggs Benedict and avoiding eye contact. It was Marcus who finally addressed the situation directly. I think we need to talk about last night. Patricia's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. I'm not sure what there is to discuss. There's plenty to discuss, Marcus said firmly. Starting with an apology. Marcus, really, there's no need, I began, but he held up a hand. There's absolutely a need. My family has spent 3 years treating my wife like she was some kind of opportunist, while she was quietly making us money and keeping her own success private out of discretion. That requires acknowledgement. Robert cleared his throat. We may have misunderstood the situation. You deliberately chose to misunderstand the situation, Marcus corrected. You made assumptions based on prejudice and never bothered to verify them. Caroline finally spoke up. We didn't know. You didn't want to know, Marcus interrupted. You were more comfortable believing Victoria was beneath us than considering she might be our equal or better. The conversation that followed was long overdue. For the first time in 3 years, the family dynamics were honest rather than hidden behind polite society manners. Patricia admitted she'd felt threatened by my confidence and had responded by trying to diminish me. Caroline confessed she'd been jealous of my education and career. Robert acknowledged he'd made assumptions based on outdated prejudices about race and class. It wasn't a complete transformation. Years of ingrained attitudes don't change overnight. But it was a beginning. The most significant change came in Marcus himself. That morning, he called his family attorney and requested a meeting to discuss his trust fund management. He wanted to understand his finances better and be more involved in the decision-making process. I've been passive about my own money for too long, he told me as we walked through the gardens behind the house. I want to learn from you, not just benefit from your expertise. It was the conversation we should have had 3 years earlier. Over the following months, our relationship underwent a fundamental shift. Marcus enrolled in investment courses and started attending industry conferences. He didn't try to become an expert overnight, but he engaged with the subject seriously for the first time in his life. More importantly, he began standing up to his family when they slipped back into old patterns. When Patricia made a subtle comment about my different background during Easter dinner, Marcus immediately corrected her. When Caroline suggested I was lucky to have found success so young, he pointed out that luck had nothing to do with years of hard work and strategic thinking. The family dynamics changed too, though more slowly. Patricia began asking my opinion on her own investments and eventually hired Chin and Associates to manage her personal portfolio. Caroline started taking business courses and launched a legitimate art consulting business rather than living entirely off her trust fund. But the most satisfying change was in how they introduced me to others. No more vague references to my working in finance, or being quite accomplished actually. Patricia began telling people I was the founder of Chin and Associates, and Robert would mention our firm's performance when discussing investment strategies with his golf partners. 1 year after that Christmas dinner revelation, we hosted the family gathering at our new home, a contemporary house in Marin County with views of the San Francisco Bay. As I watched Patricia help my mother arrange flowers while Caroline discussed business school applications with my father, I realized the evening had become what it should have been all along. A meeting of equals rather than a performance of hierarchy. Marcus found me on the deck, watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and crimson. "Any regrets?" he asked, slipping his arm around my waist. "About waiting 3 years to tell them the truth? About any of it?" I considered the question seriously. The 3 years of subtle insults and careful exclusion had been painful, but they'd also taught me something valuable about the difference between respect and recognition. His family had eventually learned to respect my success, but they'd never truly recognized my worth as a person until they understood my financial value. "No regrets," I said finally. "Sometimes people need to be shocked into seeing clearly. And now we build something better." That Christmas, as we sat around our own dining table sharing stories and laughter with both families, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The woman who had been called a gold digger was indeed involved with gold. She was making it, managing it, and multiplying it for the very people who had questioned her motives. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd accused me of marrying for money while I was the one with money. They'd suggested I was beneath their standards while I was exceeding their expectations. They'd worried I would take advantage of their son while I was taking care of their assets. But more than the financial vindication, I'd gained something more valuable. A husband who finally understood who he'd married, and a family who learned that worth isn't determined by pedigree, it's demonstrated by action. As Marcus raised his glass to toast new traditions and old values, I thought about all the assumptions that had been shattered that Christmas Eve night. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply letting the truth speak for itself. The champagne glasses clinked again, but this time they didn't stop.
The irony of being called too old in a glass-walled conference room named after Alan Turing, who revolutionized computing at 41, wasn't lost on me. I sat across from Marcus Chen, the 28-year-old CEO of Nexus Digital, watching him deliver the speech he'd probably practiced in front of his Tesla's rearview mirror. "Sarah," he said, not even looking up from his MacBook, "tech moves fast. We need people who can keep up. I'm Diana Walker, 45, with 20 years of software development experience and 11 patents to my name." But to Marcus and his fresh from Stanford executive team, I was just another Gen X relic taking up valuable standing desk space. "Your severance package is generous," Jennifer Ross, the 30-year-old HR director, added with practiced sympathy. "4 months' pay, plus we won't contest your unemployment claim." I kept my face neutral, thinking about the email I'd received last night from Kingston Venture Partners. The one confirming they'd approved my private buyout proposal. The one sitting in my personal inbox while Marcus explained how I was falling behind in an industry I'd helped build. "The truth is," Marcus continued, adjusting his Patagonia vest, "we're moving toward younger, more aggressive talent. People who live and breathe the startup culture. Unlike me, who merely wrote the code that powered their entire cloud infrastructure. The same code they tried to get me to transfer to their GitHub repository last week. The code I'd carefully licensed under my own LLC 5 years ago. We'll need you to sign these standard NDAs." Jennifer slid a stack of papers across the table. "And of course, transfer any relevant project files before you leave." "Of course," I said quietly, thinking about the other email in my inbox. The one from the patent office confirming my latest approval. The one covering the exact processing algorithm Nexus Digital had built their reputation on. "Look," Marcus leaned forward, attempting sincerity. "This isn't personal. It's just business. The market moves fast. And, well," He gestured vaguely at me. Experience isn't as valuable as innovation these days. I gathered my things slowly, methodically, the same way I'd built my career, my patents, and my quiet investment portfolio, while younger developers chased the next trending framework. One question, I said, pausing at the door. Did you ever actually read the licensing agreement for the core processing algorithm? Marcus waved dismissively. Legal handled all that years ago. Why? I smiled. No reason. Good luck with the Series C funding next week. Walking through the open office space, I passed dozens of standing desks where young developers balanced on wobble boards while typing on mechanical keyboards. None of them looked up. To them, I was just another tech dinosaur going extinct. If they'd looked closer, they might have noticed my outdated clothes were actually tailored theory. My sensible shoes were handmade Italian leather. My ancient laptop bag was handcrafted in a small workshop in Florence. But looking closer wasn't the startup way. In my car, a deliberately modest Volvo, I opened my phone and sent 2 messages. To Kingston Ventures. Proceed with the acquisition plan. Timeline accelerated. To my patent attorney. Begin enforcement proceedings. All previously discussed patents. Then I drove home to my modest condo, actually the entire top floor of the building, and opened my laptop. Time to start the process that would teach Marcus Chen and his young innovators a valuable lesson about looking past the surface. My phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor Chen, Marcus's mother, and my former colleague from our IBM days. It's done, she asked. Just like you warned me, I replied. Didn't even read the licensing agreement. Arrogant boy, she texted back. Time to teach him what real innovation looks like. I smiled, opening my files. 20 years of careful planning, strategic patents, and quiet investments were about to pay off. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's letting them realize just how wrong they've been all by themselves. And Marcus Chen was about to learn that experience isn't just valuable, it's expensive. The next week unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Young entrepreneurs, for all their talk about disruption, are remarkably predictable when their foundations start to crack. Monday morning, 9:17 a.m. The first panicked email arrived from Nexus Digital's legal team. Urgent review needed. Patent infringement claim received. I sipped my coffee in my home office, watching the chaos unfold through the various monitoring systems I still had access to. They hadn't bothered to change the admin passwords, another oversight of moving fast and breaking things. By 10 a.m., Marcus had called an emergency board meeting. I knew because I placed a significant investment in one of their main venture capital firms 3 years ago. Silent partner privileges included all board communications. My phone buzzed. Eleanor Chen again. Marcus just called me in a panic. Something about patent violations and processing algorithms. Right on schedule, I replied. Board meeting should be interesting. At precisely 11 a.m., I opened my laptop for the virtual board meeting. My small ownership stake through the DC firm granted me observer status. Most of the young executive team didn't even know I was on the call. Marcus appeared on screen, his usual confidence notably absent. We've encountered a slight technical hurdle with our core processing system. Slight? One of the board members interrupted. The entire platform is built on potentially infringing technology. Our Series C investors are already asking questions. I watched Marcus squirm, thinking about all the times he dismissed my suggestions about proper IP protection. Our legal team is reviewing options, he stammered. We believe we can work around the patent. The patent that covers our entire processing architecture. Another board member cut in. The one that apparently belongs to a holding company controlled by the employee you just fired? I smiled, remembering Marcus's words about experience not being as valuable as innovation. Jennifer from HR spoke up, her voice tight. We had no way of knowing. It's in the licensing agreement, I said quietly, making my presence known for the first time. The screen erupted in chaos as faces turned to locate my video tile. Ms. Walker, the board chair addressed me directly. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. Of course, I replied. Though you might want to review the other 7 patents my holding company controls. The ones covering your cloud infrastructure, data processing, and that clever AI implementation Marcus has been promoting to investors. The silence was deafening. This is blackmail, Marcus finally burst out. No, I corrected calmly. This is business. Isn't that what you said last week? Nothing personal. Just then, another email popped up on everyone's screen. Kingston Ventures announcing their acquisition of a controlling interest in Nexus Digital through a combination of direct purchase and proxy voting agreements. As of 11:15 a.m., I continued, Kingston Ventures holds 51% of Nexus Digital's voting shares. And as of 11:16 a.m., I'd like to call for an immediate board vote on new executive leadership. Marcus's face went from red to white. You can't. Check your shareholders' agreement, I suggested. The one you signed without reading last year when you were too busy innovating to bother with details. The next hour was a blur of legal discussions, votes, and resolutions. By lunch, I had been installed as executive chairperson, with full operational control. Marcus was offered a position as innovation consultant, a fancy title with no actual authority. As the virtual meeting ended, I sent one final email to the company. All employees please join an all-hands meeting at 2 p.m. Time to discuss some changes. Eleanor texted again. Marcus just called me crying. Said you destroyed his company. No, I replied. I saved it. He just doesn't know it yet. At 1:55 p.m., I walked into Nexus Digital's offices, my offices now. The same standing desks, the same wobble boards, but a very different energy. The young developers who had ignored me last week now watched nervously as I made my way to the conference room. Sometimes the best lessons about innovation come from the very experience so many are quick to dismiss. And I was just getting started. The all-hands meeting was set in the same glass conference room where I'd been fired a week ago. Poetic justice has a sense of humor that way. Every standing desk was empty as employees packed into the space, their average age about half of mine. Marcus sat in the back, his Patagonia vest replaced by a proper suit, his idea of looking corporate for the new boss. First, I began, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, I now control the company. No, I'm not here for revenge. And yes, I'm keeping most of you employed. The tension in the room shifted slightly. But, I continued, we're going to do things differently, starting with the assumption that youth equals innovation. I pulled up our project dashboard on the screen. See this processing algorithm everyone's been so proud of. It's actually a refined version of something I developed in 2005. The cloud infrastructure you think is cutting edge, based on principles I patented in 2010. Several young developers shifted uncomfortably. Real innovation isn't about age. It's about understanding both where technology is going and where it's been. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing a new mentorship program. Each team will pair experienced developers with younger ones. Real collaboration, not competition. Jennifer from HR raised her hand tentatively. But our culture will improve, I cut in. No more ageism, no more bias, no more assumption that only people under 30 can code. And yes, that includes bringing back several older developers who were pushed out before me. Marcus stood up in the back. This is exactly why we needed young leadership. You're turning us into IBM. I smiled. Interesting you mention IBM. Did you know they just licensed 2 of my patents? Or that Google tried to acquire my holding company last year? Age didn't seem to bother them. He sat down abruptly. Now, I turned back to the room. Let's talk about the future. Not just the next funding round or the next product launch, but real, sustainable growth. Over the next hour, I outlined my vision, a company that valued both experience and fresh perspectives, a workplace where innovation came from collaboration, not discrimination, and most importantly, a culture that understood the real value of institutional knowledge. 3 months later, the changes were evident. Our stock price had doubled. The Series C funding came through at a valuation 3 times higher than projected. And most surprisingly, we'd become known as the tech company that got diversity right, including age diversity. I sat in my office, the same one Marcus used to occupy, reviewing our latest quarterly reports when Ellinger Chen visited. Marcus finally read all the patents, she said, settling into a chair. He was up all night going through your portfolio. Said he had no idea one person could build so much so quietly. That was the point, I replied. While everyone was watching for the next young prodigy, no one noticed the quiet engineer building an empire. He wants to know if you'll mentor him, she added with a slight smile. Says he has a lot to learn. I glanced at my calendar. Tell him to come by tomorrow morning, early. We're launching a new AI initiative, and he should understand how it builds on work I did a decade ago. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Teaching the next generation? Teaching them to value all generations, I corrected. That evening, as I walked through the office, I passed dozens of workstations where young developers now sat beside experienced engineers. The wobble boards were mostly gone, replaced by ergonomic chairs. Turns out proper back support beats trendy discomfort. My phone buzzed with a message from our biggest competitor. Interested in discussing a merger? I smiled, remembering their CEO's dismissive comments about outdated leadership last year. Sorry, I typed back. Not interested in selling, but I might be interested in buying. Because sometimes success isn't just about proving people wrong about you. It's about changing how they think about everyone who comes after you. 1 year later, Nexus Digital had become the model for tech company culture. Our mentor program was being copied across Silicon Valley. Our patent portfolio had grown to include innovations from developers of all ages. And most importantly, we've proven that true disruption comes from combining experience with fresh perspectives. Marcus, to his credit, had learned. He now led our innovation team, but with a new appreciation for the value of experience. His latest project, an AI system that combined classical programming principles I'd developed years ago with cutting-edge machine learning. As for me, I kept my outdated clothes, my sensible shoes, and my quiet way of building things that last. Because real innovation isn't about age. It's about understanding that progress doesn't mean discarding the past, but building on it. And sometimes the best way to disrupt an industry isn't with new technology, but with old wisdom. Respect everyone. Learn from experience. And never underestimate someone just because they remember a time before smartphones. The final vindication came at the annual Tech Innovation Awards. Nexus Digital won Company of the Year, and I was asked to give the keynote speech. Standing at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces, young and old, experienced and fresh, I delivered just one line: innovation doesn't have an expiration date. Because sometimes the most powerful disruption isn't in technology, it's in changing how people think about who can create it. And at 46, I was just getting started.